Hello and welcome to the channel. As always, like the video, and if you enjoyed the story, leave a comment on if you would want more. This fan fiction was not created by me, but in the description there is a link to the fanfic so you can show your support to the creator and read along. Without any more delay, let's dive into the story.
1 year later. Butterflies raced through Hinata's stomach as her body flew through the air. Mind working frantically, she twisted subtly in midair so she wouldn't land painfully on her back. A dull thumping sound was heard as Hinata finally landed on the gym mat. No pain shot through her solid muscles because of her safe landing, but even if she did land strangely, her muscles were developed to an extent where it wouldn't hurt her 7-year-old body anyway. But it's better to be safe than sorry. Hinata-chan, you've been down 3 times. Sasuke-kun, you win. Irika stated, somewhat bored, as Hinata rose to her feet. Hinata knew exactly why her sensei was bored for this fight. The outcomes when Sasuke fought were always the same. He always won. Although Sasuke's skills had improved tremendously over the past year, his personality had taken a drastic turn. The Sasuke who was soft-spoken and polite had become cold and arrogant. The Sasuke before the massacre had been distant, but still pretty friendly to all those he knew, apart from Naruto because they too had fought. Now, if someone were to come up to him, unless it was about his schoolwork, he was completely reserved. However, because of his prodigy status and broody looks, girls flocked to him more than ever. In return, the girls of her year, the infatuation had spread out of the classroom, only got rejection for their affections, sometimes cruelly. Naturally, since the girls were all after one boy, competition was fierce, sometimes scarily so. Over the last year, she had seen the strongest of friendships crack and crumble, and the worst of enemies do treacherous deeds to the opposition to look good in Sasuke's eyes. And the opposition meant everyone who was female. Apart from Hinata herself, who didn't try to win Sasuke's affections as she did not want them, and she believed Sasuke didn't like her much either. On the other hand, this didn't exclude Sakura, much to Naruto's despair. Naruto's friendship with her had crumbled into dust over the last year, because Sakura kept on rejecting his offers to hang out. Sometimes she even beat Naruto for silly things he would say and do, which was often as he was a natural joker. The Pinkette ignored Hinata's adopted brother entirely, which made Hinata angry in the sense that she was abandoning the boy who was kind to her for someone cold and unlikely to return her affections. It would be a love triangle, but Sasuke didn't seem to love anyone or even like them, so Sakura didn't have a chance. As for herself, life was good. Hard work, but good. Her training was going excellently, despite the new pressure to keep it all a secret. In truth, it made her want to train harder because when she was finally strong enough, she could come out and flatten anybody who would threaten her or those around her. Her summoning had improved to the extent where she could summon the entire family of monkeys she knew in one jutsu. The benefits of her rigorous daily exercise were really starting to show on her face as well as her body. Her cheekbones were more defined and her face a little thinner, not so thin that she looked ill, but traces of puppy fat still lingered, giving her an overall childish look. Her fighting had improved in leaps and bounds because of her fitness and muscle density. She could avoid even scars flowing yet feral attacks with her developing fighting style and speed and even strike a few basic counterattacks of her own. Her chakra reserves had grown because she was aging and developing as well as training, and she could control her chakra to such a level where she could produce chakra needles from any one of her upper body tenketsu points. She still had a bit of work to do with her lower half. As for actual jutsu, she could create 5 clones, and control them to an extent, transform. She had done the jutsu so many times that the smoke produced by making the jutsu had vanished, giving a better overall effect to the jutsu, and use healing palm. Simultaneously, plus she was starting to grasp the body replacement technique, but she had no idea where the objects came from. Every time she used it, a log seemed to take her place. And there were no perfectly cut logs in her little apartment, or in the forest for that matter. On the matter of plants, Hinata was on the last volume of her herbal books, Master Herbs and Elixirs. It actually works. It was the middle of summer in Konoha, a prime time for rashes, bug bites, sunburn and allergies, all of which she could cure. Due to her training, Hinata had been going easy on the herbal business as she already had quite a bit of money saved up from it. As for her secret abilities, she had started to improve her Byakugan, in the sense that she tried to read people's auras better, with Byakugan both active and inactive. She also spent many hours meditating with Byakugan on, pushing at the edges of her vision with her chakra, trying to increase her range. The intensity had improved too. She was starting to acknowledge insects in the forest, and 3 more Tenketsu points were visible on another human's body. The other gift, however, she had no such luck. No matter how hard she tried, the lashing arms of liquidizing chakra wouldn't appear, only chakra needles would poke out of her chakra points. Hinata was still waiting in anticipation for the day the Hokage came back to her on both her Shinsina Byakugan and hopefully her chakra tentacles. On the friendship front, everything was great too. Every break she hung around with Tenten, Lee, Shino, Shikamaru, and Choji. She had even gone out to the cinema and eaten in a restaurant with them all a couple of times. True, Lee had to carry Shikamaru there because he was so lazy, and they were nearly all poor from Choji's eating habits, and Shino was a very fussy eater, and Lee tried to eat as much as Choji, and gave himself a ridiculously hard challenge when he epically failed, 1,000 laps round Konoha, on his hands. In an insane bout of endurance he did it, and the girls just watched as their group commenced in general banter that they were so used to, yet never tired of seeing it. Hinata loved her friends anyway, their quirks is what made them human. And boy, did her group have a lot of quirks. For instance, Choji. Every meal, he had to finish the last bite of food, otherwise he would go into a fury. Also, her larger-than-life friend seemed to have developed a defense mechanism against bullies. Every time someone called him fat, it would send him into the most terrible rage. Eventually, the kids in her class grew to fear Choji and his rages. Add to that Choji's strength had seemed to have tripled over the year and his large body was filling out even more. Shikamaru had less obvious traits, but there were a few Hinata could pick out. Even though he didn't try writing anything down in class, a couple of times she had seen Shikamaru making the strangest hand sign with his hands. Later, when she had offered to play a game of shogi, she seemed to win when she was lucky. She had no actual skill for it, and he was in a difficult position, he would make the hand sign again. Hinata concluded it was his thinking pose. Shino was a very peculiar friend. He was very, very, very quiet, as well as uncannily observant like Shikamaru. He had no problem speaking his mind, but he didn't speak often. He had a natural fascination for insects. Hinata decided it was because of his clan, and frequently showed the group an interesting specimen that he had found on the fallen log at their break time meeting place. But he had 2 major weaknesses. 1. If someone were to kill an insect, even accidentally, as was the case with Lee, or there was another insectivorous animal or plant around, he would go into despair, or viciously attack the offending creature who had killed the bug. Lee was lucky that he was so fast, otherwise Shino would have seriously maimed him. The other weakness was human contact. Hinata found out that Shino had a very large personal bubble, and only a few people were allowed to come within his touching boundaries. Hinata prided herself on being one of them. Lee, well, he was just Lee. Although, his youth talk had gotten more frequent over the year, and he had started wearing a green jumpsuit. Not only that, but he had cut his long black hair into a shiny bowl cut which flicked up at the back. Hinata usually wasn't bothered by looks, but Lee had so much potential to look amazing, especially with the change of hairstyle. It suited him, if he would just let her fix his wardrobe and eyebrows. But it didn't really matter. He was happy, so Hinata was happy. And Tenten, her sister-like friend. She was the human she spent the most time with, save Naruto as she lived with him, and being naturally observant, Hinata had recorded all of Tenten's quirks. 1. She played with her hair when she was nervous, sometimes even letting her hair down and then putting it back up again. 2. Occasionally she would speak only in the old language, mostly when she was angry, which wasn't a lot. She had a naturally happy disposition. 3. She had an undying love for dragons and pandas. Even her apartment, Tenten lived by herself with a Chunnin watcher, someone who would check on her every 3 days, was themed for the 2 animals. 4. Tenten was curious to the point of dangerous. The river that flowed by the side of their break time meeting place had been fallen in by many times by the panda lookalike girl because she thought she had seen a fish. Some trees were destroyed around their meeting places. Tenten loved to climb and explore. Add to that Lee's training, which also included falling out of trees into certain rivers. There were many quirks about the girl. Hinata couldn't name them all in her head, she would have to write them down to list them all. But she loved the quirks, they were what made up the curious ball of energy that was 1010. Hinata-chan, can you continue this lesson? Irika had broken her thoughts with his caring question. A quick nod of the head was all it took to confirm her well-being. Okay Hinata-chan, your next opponent will be Sakura-chan. Sakura-chan, step onto the mat. Sakura. Hinata was up against the one person in the class she held tentative, yet growing grudges against. She had broken up the original gang, perhaps that wasn't really her fault, as in she didn't mean to, but because she had been there, the group had split. She was the object of her adoptive brother's affections, and named brother's affections were turned down cruelly, with sometimes a beating to go along with it. The pink-headed girl was loud and shallow, competing, like most girls of the class, for Sasuke, and Hinata figured she didn't really have feelings for him. She was an immature 7-year-old, she was just being a sheep and following everyone else. And one other thing bothered her about the civilian-raised ninja, she had made her ex-best friend suffer. Yes, Ino had abandoned her for Sakura, but Hinata couldn't bring herself to dislike the blonde girl. When they had been close it had been amazing. True, Ino could look after herself, but Sakura had thrown away. What was a great friendship over a boy, something Hinata wouldn't even think of doing. That, in Hinata's eyes, was true disloyalty. So as the pink cat stepped up confidently on the blue gym mat, her cement-like grudges were set into concrete resolve. She would clear up any hard feelings through beating the girl. It was unlike Hinata to think like this, but in truth, her opponent was weak in combat. She had a brilliant academic mind and her chakra control was excellent, but there again, her general jutsu skills were below average and Hinata suspected the only reason Sakura was good at controlling her chakra was because she didn't have a lot of it to control. Sakura had great potential, but in physical lessons she did little, and never once had Hinata seen Sakura train outside of school, and she was using the Byakugan a lot now. All Sakura did when she got home was wash her hair and body. Unfortunately, having the Byakugan did mean you could look through clothes and walls. She couldn't really help it, so she tried not to focus on particular people. It was embarrassing. Go shopping with her mother, something that Hinata wasn't afraid to admit she was jealous of, but she didn't brood over her lack of parents, or follow Sasuke around like a sheep in a flock of fangirls. Oh Sasuke-kun. When I win this will you come round to mine to have tea? Sakura asked, flicking her candy floss hair in Sasuke's direction. No. The answer Sasuke gave his admirer was short and brutal, but apart from a flinch Sakura didn't betray any hurt. He's playing hard to get, this will impress him right? I can't lose. Sakura thought to herself, looking up her opponent. Hinata-san, eh? She won't be too hard, but why is she looking at me like that? Sakura's nerves increased as she met two pale lavender eyes staring straight at her. It's unlike Hinata-san to meet someone's eyes, it's kinda creepy when she looks at me. Meanwhile, Hinata was assessing up her opponent carefully. Observing her classmates had paid off really, she knew what moves they were most capable of. She was in the middle of developing a way to truly practice sparring, she called it shadow sparring. Basically, she imagined what attacks her classmates would do, based on what she had seen in lessons, and fight the imaginary opponent, working out what she needed to do to counter what moves and what speed she needed to avoid attacks. While slipping into her stance, Hinata upped the weight in her gravity seal, just to slow her down so she didn't get carried away. Her seal work had improved lately, but she spent so much time on everything else seals didn't get a lot of attention. Nevertheless, she could perform gravity seals, scroll seals, weak chakra restraints, it limited the amount of chakra she was allowed to use, finger engraving seal, where she can engrave writing on a surface using her chakra. Hinata found out what it was when she read the Chunin level, seals. It matched the description of what she did when she cut herbs and food up, and write explosion seals, but she had never had any reason to use them, but it was a comfort to know how to create them in a flash. Marks. Get set. Spar. Irika shouted, but there was no movement on the mats. Hinata stood stock still, waiting for Sakura to make her first move. Sakura had yet to even get into a proper stance, she was too busy gazing at Sasuke. Occasionally the pink head would flicker her emerald eyes over towards Hinata, but they quickly went back to the last Uchiha again. Sakura, into stance now. Hinata-chan is nice enough to wait, but an enemy wouldn't wait for you to get ready. Irika scolded, much to Sakura's chagrin. Once Hinata's opponent's blush had settled, Sakura finally got into a clumsy stance. The girl had little combat ability. In fact, she was one of the worst fighters in the class, on par with Shikamaru, who had great potential, but his effort was nil and his concentration was on daydreaming rather than sparring. It wasn't that the girl didn't have talent, or lacked the physical capability, she was frighteningly strong, especially when she hit Naruto. No, it was because she lacked effort and concentration, much like Shikamaru. All of a sudden, Sakura rushed toward her with all the grace of a charging bull. To some, Sakura running might look fast, but Hinata's eyes and reflexes were quite used to speed, due to her running in the forest. To her, Sakura looked to be running in slow motion with a scrunched-up face of determination. Finally Sakura reached her, and in a blurry of movement, Hinata struck out of the girl's chest with a single flat palm. The world stopped for a mere second and Hinata saw Sakura's leaf-green eyes bulge, before she was flung through the air. The girl landed heavily on the gym floor, letting out a shout of surprise and probably pain too. Hinata's conscience twinged, but then she remembered how the pinkette had treated her brother and felt a little better. Air. Hinata-chan wins. Sakura, you were pushed off the mats. Better luck next time. Irika commented, scratching his scarred nose. Hinata only felt slightly offended by the fact her sensei had based her win on luck. Maybe she should win more often to change his mind. And no. Secrets. The Hokage said to keep everything as secret. I'm not strong enough to fend off real ninja yet. Hinata drooped her shoulders and looked to the floor in mock anxiety and remorse. Sorry Sakura-san. The bluehead mumbled shyly, before shuffling over to where Shikamaru and Choji stood. Well, that was short Hinata-chan. Shikamaru said, eyes lidded as he observed his friend. Yeah, Hina-chan, that was pretty cool. Sakura's been getting on my nerves lately, she keeps calling me fat. A pack of crisps seemed to suddenly appear in Choji's bandaged, he had started wearing them lately, hands. I'm not fat, I'm big-boned, right? Hinata nodded, her conscience of hurting Sakura had eased once and for all. She was mean to Choji too, and Shikamaru grunted. Choji, my friend, you really don't need to worry about that troublesome girl. She doesn't know you, so she can't judge you. You need to eat anyway. Shikamaru yawned and stretched his arms lazily. Hinata already knew why Choji needed to eat so much. His clan uses jutsus that converted calories into chakra. Still, if there was any other way to store energy. Other kids were cruel to him because of his necessary size. Alright kiddies, line up. I've got a little announcement to make. Irika suddenly announced through Hinata's thought. Without thinking, she started to make her way to the line, Shikamaru and Choji right behind her. When everyone was accounted for, Irika did the register. Irika produced a hat out of nowhere, literally, it poofed into his hands. Everyone oohed but was shortly cut off by Irika. Okay, I should explain. Irika coughed once before going on. Basically, 30 years ago we formed an alliance with the Wind Country. In a show of good faith, once every 10 years they allow one Konoha Academy student over for a month. We show our faith by letting their kage come to visit ours sometimes, armed. Irika shuffled the black hat in his hands. Hinata wasn't tall enough to see what was inside the hat, but she guessed it was paper strips by the sound it made when it moved. We were going to do this last year, but there were certain circumstances that had to be dealt with first. However, now that everything is settled, it's time to choose the lucky winner. There was another draw and out of all the classes in Konoha Academy, ours was chosen. This draw is to select the winner. So without further ado. Excited chatter circulated around the gym hall, but it went completely silent as soon as Irika dipped his hand into the hat. Strange feeling of knowing swept over Hinata as she saw her sensei's tan hand rise up out of the hat, a single slip of paper clasped in between his two brown fingers. It's going to be me. I can feel it. Hinata's eyes focused on Irika's lips, almost reading them before he actually said anything. Hinata Hyuga? Irika announced, almost like a question. Why can't they spell her name right? Irika wondered to himself, looking at the blue-headed girl. Disappointed grumbles and a couple of shouts of excitement from Naruto echoed throughout the hall, all unheard to the girl who actually won the opportunity. Wind, the mongoose, they can visit home. Thoughts of her ecstatic adopted family surged through her head, making her smile brightly in elation. All of a sudden, her world spun as a solid object came crashing into her. She would have been scared if it not for the object's smell. The smell of ramen, soap, and her apartment. The scent of Naruto. Hina-chan. I'm gonna miss you. Naruto gushed, clinging onto the startled girl for dear life. Other kids around her, save Shino, Shikamaru and Choji, and Sasuke, started to snicker. Yeah. Although it will be a troublesome trek there. Shikamaru commented. Still, have a nice time. Yeah, have a great time, Hinata-chan. Could you tell me about wine cuisine, if it's not too much trouble? Choji pleaded, just before stuffing another crisp inside his mouth. No. Instead. I'll bring back something for everyone. Hinata promised, taking joy from the excited looks on her friends' faces. Even Shino was letting out more emotions than usual, his mouth was upturned in not a smirk, but a real, true smile. Enjoy your time in Wind, Hinata-chan. We will all miss you, but a month isn't too long. It wasn't much, but it was more than enough to make tears come to Hinata's pale eyes. Friends that cared, that stuck by her, that would miss her when she was gone. It was an unbelievable feeling, and Hinata wondered what she had done to deserve them. Warm tears slid down her cheek, but it wasn't out of sorrow, grief, or pain. For the first time in her life, Hinata cried out of happiness. Gently, 4 pairs of arms wrapped around her, squeezing her into a big, group embrace. I am gonna miss you all too. Hinata sniffled, leaning into all their embraces. Coughs startled the group out of their fluffy moment, and they broke apart. The boys gave Hinata small smiles, and Hinata returned them all. Hinata-chan, you leave tonight at 6. I am allowing you to leave school once this break is over, so you can pack for a month and get everything you want sorted out. Irika explained. He turned back to the whole class. Right, class dismissed. Good job everyone, you are all coming on well with your taijutsu. Next lesson, English. Naruto let out a high-pitched whine, he hated English. In fact, he hated lessons, but he loved to learn. Hinata found that rather strange. Naruto, I will be checking everywhere in my classroom for pranks, and if you don't attend class I will tell Ichiraku not to sell ramen to you. Naruto gasped heavily in shock. Irika-sensei, he whined, eyes abnormally large. Hinata giggled a little, Naruto and his ramen. She had a feeling it was all he was going to eat while she was away, but she would let him. However, when she came back from her trip, he was going to eat nothing but vegetables. Alright kids, off you go. As soon as Irika gave the real all clear, her classmates rushed out of the gym. Apart from her friends, Naruto had rushed out too, but not before he gave her a mournful wave, and Sasuke of course. He only rushed in training. Hinata-chan, if you have no questions about tonight, are you ready to walk with us to meet Tenten-chan and Lee-kun? Shino asked, his eyes probably intense behind his blue blocker glasses. Even Hinata didn't know Shino's eye color, she had seen his eyes through her Byakugan. All she could say was that they were a very nice pair of eyes. I have one question, Shino-kun, please wait for me a second. Hinata turned to her sensei. Irika-sensei, who is coming to Suna with me? Good question. Apparently, the Lord Hokage and some guards are going. Irika answered, pausing at the word guards. Is that all, Hinata-chan? Hinata nodded before she and her gang walked out of the gym and across the busy playground to their meeting place amongst the trees. It didn't take them long to get there, they were walking pretty fast. Hinata felt a little sad all of a sudden, she wouldn't see her wonderful, precious people for an entire month. A heavy feeling settled in her stomach, and tears prickled in her eyes again as she was greeted to the sight of Lee and Ten. The pair was on the floor, and Ten was tickling Lee on the stomach, but he looked unnaturally calm, like he was forcefully enduring the playful touch. However, Ten's chocolate brown eyes locked with Hinata's pale, teary ones, and she stopped immediately and in a dash of speed was beside Hinata. Ten-chan. You were supposed to do it for 5 minutes. It was a test of my endurance. Lee stopped short at the sight of Hinata. He appeared beside her even quicker than Ten. My most youthful Hinata-chan, what is wrong? Who has damaged one of my most precious people? Yeah, Bluey-chan, what's wrong? Immediately, Ten turned to the guys, a kunai in her hand. I swear if one of you hurt her, I will chop off whatever part of you hurt her, whether it be your hands, your feet, or your tongue. Ten threatened lowly and Shino, Choji and Shikamaru backed up instinctively at the frightening girl. Troublesome woman, if you would let us explain. Shikamaru started, but he was cut off as Ten gave a war cry. So you have heard her. The weapon's mistress dashed forward, but was stopped by a pair of small arms wrapping themselves around her body. Hinata-chan? Seriously, what's wrong? Ten murmured, rubbing the smaller girl's back in soothing circles. Hinata shook a little. She felt weak, but it was okay. Emotion, letting go, letting her mask break as little, like Shino said, she didn't have to hide around her friends. So she didn't hide her sadness, it was a way to show she cared for them all, and she would miss them enough to cry. I am leaving for Suna. Hinata sobbed, tightening her grip a little. Ten winced a little, Hinata was far stronger than she looked. Then the words sunk in. What? Why? There was a raffle. The prize was to visit the wind for a month. Hinata-chan won it. Shikamaru answered, and Ten relaxed a little. Kami-sama. I thought she got kicked out the village or something. It's okay, Hina-chan. You'll be back soon, right? If you miss us, just remember we will be here when you get back. Take it one day at a time. Ten whispered into the Bluinette's ear. She got a nod from the girl in response. After a while, Hinata let go of Ten. Ten was slightly relieved. Hinata really did have a strong grip, and flopped to the floor. The rest of her gang followed suit and began to engage in conversation. Ten-chan, can we continue our challenge now we know that the youthful Hinata-chan is okay? Lee asked, getting into a sort of meditative pose. I wish to see how hard my flames of youth burn, and complete this challenge. I must keep up with my training since the Honorable Guy-sensei is away on business. Ten simply rolled her eyes, another habit she had. Another habit that Hinata would miss dearly. She would miss everything about Konoha, so she took everything in now and imprinted it on her memory. The way the gentle breeze carried the earthly scents of leaves, animals and people from the forest beside them. The way the lush grass rippled. The way the river shone in the ever-bright sunlight, the rushing sound it made as the water found lower ground. The high-pitched chirps of the birds above the towering trees. The murmurs of lively conversation between her closest and best friends. The joyful tears of Lee as he exclaimed about his latest challenge. The way they all laughed when Lee did something silly. The way Shino would talk with underlying passion about nature. The way Shikamaru slept on the grass, with Choji munching noisily by his side. The way Ten would talk and giggle with her like sisters. She would miss it all. But when the bell went, Hinata realized that going away for a while would make her appreciate her friends even more. After teary goodbyes, Hinata walked out of the school gates, only looking back once so she didn't forget how the school looked. Her memories would be the only things that would truly comfort her in Suna. Jogging home with her seal heavier than usual, she decided what to pack for the month ahead. It was going to be a busy one. XXX. Danzo-sama, the plan is complete. The trigger is set up. Any further orders? A different faceless Aroot member informed his leader. The last informer had been disposed of for showing too much emotion on an assassination mission. Feelings were not tolerated in this association. Danzo turned round in his cheap swivelly chair. Since Root was supposed to have been disbanded, their funds had been cut off. Naturally, cuts in cost had been made, but their objectives stayed the same. Keep Konoha powerful at all costs. Have you set the trigger up as planned? Danzo asked, reaching for his walking stick at the side of his desk. Yes. A seal has been placed that injects a pain-inducing drug into Hinata Hyuga, causing her subconscious to react instinctively to protect herself. It has been set when the seal picks up a Jinchuriki's chakra signature. The member answered in monotone. And will the demon fox be delayed at school so he doesn't meet up with the Hokage who carries the device? Yes. Good. Go down to level 2, it seems our latest recruit still has some spirit in him. Beat it out of him. The aging man ordered, not even flinching as he gave out the orders to torture someone. As for the member of Root who the orders were given to, inside his conscience twinged, but he gave no signal that he felt guilty. To survive in Root, you had to be cruel. The cruelest lived longer, and were the most influential. Danzo turned around in his chair, and the informer took this as the cue to leave. It is the best theory I have as to her gifts. When I saw her in the hospital, her arms appeared when her father activated her branch seal. If I am correct, her body tries to protect itself from pain subconsciously. For now, it's all I can think of. It seems Sarutobi waiting a little longer to set out to Suna gave me more time to ponder over her abilities. Danzo tapped his cane on the floor in something resembling excitement. If all goes to plan, Suna will be weakened and ready to take. Even if it's not Root who will be doing the direct taking. But when I take Konoha, the wind will just be another jewel in the hat that will sweeten the position of Hokage. The Warhawk chuckled gruffly, before unleashing a full-out burst of insane laughter. I may not have the resources I once had, but by Kami I will get Konoha. I thank you, Hinata Hyuga. Triple X. Sharp rapping sound of knuckles on wood disturbed Hinata from her early dinner of grilled chicken breast, peas and corn in the cob. She downed the last of her body booster tea before going to answer the door. Slight sense of apprehension filled Hinata. She still hadn't gotten over her trust issues, they had only strengthened since Akane tried to kill her. Still, it was rude to keep people waiting. Nearing the door, she felt the aura of the person standing behind it. She relaxed. It was the solid, calm aura of her Hokage, Sarutobi. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door of her apartment. True to the aura, there stood the Hokage, looking a little ordinary in shinobi attire. Still, his brown eyes held untold wisdom that came only with age, eyes of an experienced veteran. It put Hinata at ease to know the Hokage would be with her. Ah, Hinata-chan, for once we meet on a calm night. The moon will be bright tonight, good for travel. The Hokage looked up into the sunset sky. A good night indeed. Are you ready to leave? Hinata nodded once in confirmation. The Hokage became blurred, and Hinata felt a wind rush past her. A mere second later, the Hokage appeared before her again, a large scroll across his back. A scroll that held all her possessions. Sealing A? I know you've been doing some extracurricular studies. Hinata's eyes widened marginally. I don't know the full extent of your abilities. Hopefully this trip might provide some insight, Hinata-chan. You've always been an enigma. Hinata didn't know whether to take that as a compliment or not. She couldn't ponder over it, the Hokage was all ready to go. And so was she, after one last thing. Hinata turned around and took a last, sweeping glance over her humble, yet homely apartment. Goodbye. It felt silly, saying farewell to your own residence, but it made Hinata feel better in a way. Nodding to herself, Hinata turned back to the Hokage. Without a word, Sarutobi began walking, Hinata right behind him. She was leaving Konoha for the first time, she didn't know what to expect. A feeling of fear and excitement rushed through Hinata's body, and she couldn't help but clench and unclench her fists as she walked. It seemed to help a little with the nerves. Black cloaked figures stood at the huge wooden gates, unmoving as the Hokage and Hinata approached them. Hinata recognized the animals the masks were supposed to portray: bird, boar, cat, scarecrow, and tiger. Tiger, Scarecrow, I thank you for coming onto active duty for a while. I assure you, ANBU will not be recruiting you anymore after this. We had to get you too since we need more ANBU to protect Konoha whilst I am away. The Hokage addressed the two ANBU in a low voice. It honors me that you would choose me for this job, Hokage-sama. I assure you, I will protect you most youthfully if it comes down to a fight. Tiger exclaimed, doing Lee's good guy pose. Hinata gasped in shock. There was no denying it, the talks of youth, the pose, this must be Lee's sensei. Guy. What he said. Scarecrow said coolly, and Hinata felt Guy's aura bounce a little. Always so cool, rival. Guy exclaimed, but the Hokage coughed and Guy's aura claimed, along with his body. Tiger, Scarecrow, unless we are inside the city of Suna, I forbid you to address each other on such regular terms. Enemy ninja may use it against you. The Hokage reprimanded, but Hinata could just make out a smile forming on his wrinkled lips. My most humble apologies, Hokage-sama. It won't happen again. A ping was heard and once again, the tiger-masked guy did the good guy pose. I apologize also. Scarecrow excused, before going silent once more. Hinata-chan, we will be taking regular stops for you, so need not worry about the journey. If we need to get there quicker, Scarecrow will give you a piggyback. A snort was heard from one ANBU member, but the Hokage only flicked his eyes over in the ANBU's direction before all went quiet. That won't be necessary, Hokage-sama. I can run okay. I think. Hinata informed quietly. The Hokage cocked his head once before going to the front of the ANBU. Hinata-chan, I will lead at the front and the ANBU will surround you. Are you ready? The Hokage asked kindly. Yes. Hinata replied with some enthusiasm. Immediately, she lightened up her seal. This was ANBU after all. A few years of speed training couldn't compare to ANBU's agility, could it? Go! The Hokage set off a run. A few seconds later, the second pair of ANBU set off after him. Hinata looked beside her. Tiger and Scarecrow were at her side. Hinata-san, go! Scarecrow ordered, so Hinata set off at a run too. Goodbye, Konoha. It was her last thought before Hinata jumped up along with the ANBU into the trees to start her adventure. As the sky darkened, progress through the forest was becoming increasingly slow. Hinata, the ANBU, and the Hokage had been traveling little over an hour, with no signs of fully stopping. The Hokage quickly found out that Hinata could keep up with his ANBU, but he slowed himself as not to tire her too quickly. Her endurance could be lacking, but he could say her speed was certainly not. Another hour passed, and Hinata herself was starting to feel the effects of forest travel. Sure, she had traveled for longer in the Forest of Death, but she didn't need to think about where to place her foot because she knew the area so well. She had traveled through it blindfolded. However, outside in this unfamiliar forest, she had to judge how far to jump from branch to branch, and it drained her of energy. Suddenly, the Hokage stopped. His ANBU did the same. Hinata tried to follow suit, but with a sickening snap the branch she landed on broke away from the tree. She was a long way off from the ground, and below her was undergrowth that had thorns and nettles in it. Mind working frantically, Hinata tried to find something to cling onto. But there was nothing. The tree was too far away to cling to, and there were no other branches around. Hinata squeezed her eyes shut and prepared herself for the pain. Suddenly, she felt a rush of chakra pouring out of her body, and all motion stopped. But she couldn't feel ground. When she heard gasps, she finally opened her eyes once more. All of a sudden, she knew why they were gasping. Two spirals of her silvery indigo chakra had come out of her waist and gone to the forest floor, essentially holding her in midair. Although she couldn't see the ANBU's faces, she could feel their auras. They were all nervous. The only one who didn't seem fazed at all by this was the Hokage. He just looked at Hinata with knowing eyes. His brow was furrowed in thought, making his forehead more wrinkled than it already was. After a heartbeat, he snapped to attention. Suddenly, the Hokage became a blur rushing towards her. Skillfully, the aged leader twisted his body so that he wouldn't touch the chakra tentacles, but he was able to lift Hinata by the armpits to a safe branch. The Hokage's touch seemed to break the concentration Hinata had, and the energy tentacles dissipated. The two landed on a stable branch and the Hokage gently placed her small body onto it, before turning around to address the still shocked ANBU. ANBU, this is an S-class secret. Nothing more is to be said about this matter, understood? If any other country finds out, she will be in danger along with Konoha. The Hokage boomed, authority clear in his voice. Unless I say otherwise, Hinata-chan's gift is not to be mentioned. Is that clear? Hi. The ANBU chorused back. The Hokage nodded in satisfaction. Troops, night is upon us. We have a child in our ranks, so it's time to rest. You know what to do. Without a word, the ANBU dissolved in the night to complete whatever task the Hokage sent them to do. Massive quake shook the ground, but the Hokage wasn't alarmed, so Hinata composed herself again. That will be Katsan asterisk with the house. Come, Hinata-chan. I need you to be fully rested for tomorrow. We set off early. The Hokage told her, taking her hand and jumping from branch to branch. The two stopped at a clearing, where a massive wooden house stood. Hinata doubted even the ANBU would have been able to build that in a minute. Could someone make wooden houses grow out of nowhere? Also, the Hokage's plans of rest disturbed Hinata's training regime. Currently, she was in the process of walking up trees, something she had read long ago in Genin level, chakra control. It mentioned it also in Chunin level, chakra control. Hinata hadn't been practicing it because she thought she had no need for it, but an incident in the Forest of Death, involving a tree, 3 mutant tigers and some rain, had taught her otherwise. She had only been doing it for a fortnight or so, and for an hour at a time. She had to fit in all her other training around it, so she couldn't spend a lot of time on one thing. An idea struck her just as the figure of the cat-masked ANBU member walked out of the wooden house. Hokage-sama, shall I make the firewood now? The ANBU asked, but the Hokage shook his head. Hinata frowned in thought at the cat-masked ANBU's choice of words. He said make. Surely it was a mistake? I sent Scarecrow and Tiger to do that. Tiger needs some energy burning and Scarecrow can keep him in check. If not, pray Kami-sama helps us. The wrinkled leader replied. Hinata's ears caught the sound of shouting, so she tried to focus in on it. Sending the tiniest stream of chakra to her ears, her hearing became infinitely more acute. She could suddenly make out what the voices were saying. Scarecrow, who can chop wood faster, me or you? The unmistakable voice of Tiger boomed. Does it matter? Scarecrow's voice was a lot quieter. Hinata had had to strain her ears to catch up the words he mumbled. Aha, I see now. You forfeit. 32-30 now, I won the last challenge, and you took defeat coolly, do you not recall? Tiger gleefully shouted. Hinata could just imagine the person underneath the Scarecrow mask cringing. Guy was very loud. She saw exactly where Lee got his exuberance from. I didn't say I forfeit. I merely asked you what the point of this ridiculous exercise. Scarecrow quickly said. Hinata couldn't help but let out a small giggle. It seemed Scarecrow wanted to keep his pride intact. It is to test how bright the flames of our youth burn. On your marks, get set, go. Tremendous crack could be heard, making Hinata wince. She called the chakra away from her ears, relieved now because hearing everything was confusing and a little painful. The Hokage sighed, getting his pipe from his pocket. Those two are bad as each other. Tiger, I expect. But Scarecrow? A flame flickered on the fingertip of the weary Hokage. He lit the pipe with the tiny flame, before it flickered delicately and went out. Taking a long, satisfying drag from the pipe, the Hokage walked inside, leaving tendrils of intoxicating smoke twirling in his wake. Hinata's idea came back to her. She was surrounded by the elite of the elite and the Hokage. Surely, one of them could help her a little? Her immediate thought was the Hokage himself, but the Hokage had helped her enough and he looked a little worn down. Her second idea was to seek Guy, as he was Lee's mentor. A terrifying thought popped into her head: what if he made her wear a green jumpsuit like Lee? And then cut her hair into some sort of blue, shiny bowl cut? True, she could find out what sort of toothpaste Lee used. Lee had refused to tell her, as she suspected Guy used the same, but Guy and Lee had enough youthful energy for the entire village. If she adopted their persona, then there literally would be too much youth for the village. The other three she didn't really know, and approaching them would be scary. There again, approaching Guy would be scary too. "Hinata-chan, you need something?" the cat-masked Anbu asked, his face tilted downwards to see her. Nerves shot through Hinata, but she ignored them. As much as she didn't like to speak to new people, the fact that someone asked her if she needed something was a nice starter to a conversation. And no, well, you see. Go on. You can tell me. The man encouraged. "I've been trying to walk up trees, but I can't seem to stay on." Hinata frowned to herself. Now that she thought about it, the rest of her chakra control exercises hadn't been going too well either. Well, apart from that branch incident, but that was instinctual, she supposed. "You've been trying that already? I thought that was for when you graduate the academy?" the cat-masked man asked. "No matter. They take things slower now anyway since the academy graduate age has gone up to 12. "What do you mean?" Hinata asked. She hadn't heard a word of this. "Well, the village council put it up because they don't like sending little children onto missions. They think it corrupts the child too much and causes problems in the future. They want kids grown up enough to do it instead. So no one is allowed to graduate from Shinobi Academy until they are 12, no matter how gifted they are." The cat-masked Anbu suddenly chuckled. "Look at me, talking away when you've asked for help." He turned away and walked to the wooden wall of the house. "This is just like a tree, trust me." Hinata suspected there was a private joke hidden there somewhere, but she just couldn't put her finger on it. Hinata closed her eyes and sent a steady stream of chakra to her feet, but she knew something was off. It was like her chakra just couldn't settle. It was always changing, always in motion. And it frightened Hinata. She had worked so hard over 3 years to get the skills she had now. "Alright, I think I know what's going on here." The voice of the cat Anbu overrode her concentration. Hinata cut off the chakra flow to her feet and opened her eyes. "It's unusual to have this, but you're going through another growth spurt." Hinata tilted her head, but said nothing. Humans have 2 growth spurts, one when you're a baby, and one when you're a teenager. These growth spurts are what develops your chakra coils, as well as the rest of your body. Got me so far? Hinata nodded and waited for the man to elaborate. "You have already had your baby growth spurt, but now you are going through another one. This growth spurt only affects your chakra system. It's very rare, and it will unbalance your chakra for a while. Your body isn't growing fast though, you'll keep growing steadily. But your chakra system is developing quickly again." Hinata nodded again. She got all of this. "But why? Anbu-sama, why is this happening to me?" Hinata asked, truly starting to worry. "Well, there are only 2 reasons. 1, you've got abnormally large chakra reserves, and your chakra system is growing to keep up with you. Either that or you're just lucky enough to have one." Lucky? The shadows of worry began to recede from her mind, and she felt herself relax and become excited at the same time. "Yes, lucky. When this and your teen growth spurt are complete, you will have a very, very resilient chakra system, so you wouldn't have to worry about chakra burns at all. Plus, you will be able to push more chakra out of you than usual. It's a good thing. Only Jinchurikis have this." Kushina-san, Kami-sama rest her soul, submitted herself to tests to see how her chakra system was handling the fox spirit's chakra. Apparently she went through this when she had the fox sealed inside her, so that when she used her chakra her system wouldn't get overloaded by the power. But why Hinata? She's not a Jinchuriki obviously. The Hokage has to hear about this. Naruto hasn't had one at all. Was he born with a resistant chakra system? There again, I've heard from Irika his chakra control is beyond pitiful. So he could have already gone through his and we've not noticed. Maybe it's due to her power we saw back when traveling, or could it be something else? Meanwhile, Hinata was celebrating. Who knew her being unable to walk up trees could be a good thing? Her thoughts halted. The Catman hadn't said a thing about when this spurt would be over. "Yes sir, when will I be normal again?" Hinata asked quickly, fear filling her again. "I've already had 2 weeks of this." 2 weeks, eh? Another week or so will do it. Then you'll be back to normal again. Oh, and don't worry, your chakra won't be affected by the teen growth spurt. It's strange, I know. There was a rustling in the bushes and the cat-masked man turned quickly to see who emerged. Faces hid by the mountainous pile of wood they both carried, the two figures slowly shuffled over near Hinata, before dumping their load onto the floor. Hinata winced as the slabs of perfectly cut firewood knocked together. Her senses really had improved thanks to the mongoose's training. "I concede defeat, Scarecrow. It is a dent in my pride, but you have beaten me in this challenge. So now it's even." The disguised guy bowed humbly to Scarecrow and then trotted off inside the wooden hut, giving Hinata and Cat a huge thumbs up as he went by. "Even." Scarecrow mumbled, his mask facing the direction of Guy. "Hinata-chan, dinner is in 30 minutes sharp, so don't go to sleep just yet," the cat-masked member informed the silent girl. Thank you so much, Kat-sama." Hinata bowed deeply and went inside the wooden mansion. It looks like I might be able to get some training in after all." But thoughts of training were put on hold as she inspected the house. It was huge, far from the small, homely flat she was used to. Everything looked natural, yet man-made. Hinata slid her fingers over the smooth wood of the banister. Maybe it was Naruto rubbing off on her, but suddenly she had thoughts of sliding down the almost silky rail. The corners of her mouth turned up in a melancholy smile. If Naruto himself were here, he would have done that already. Heat rushed to her face, and she felt her eyes welling up. Don't get homesick so soon, one day, no, 1 hour at a time. After deep breath of fresh, sweet air that soothed her sadness, she sat in the base of the stairs. It was her meditation time. The hardest things for a ninja in training to overcome are physical disabilities, lack of motivation, or, in Hinata's case, low chakra reserves. She had been born with a smaller than average chakra reserve, but working every day, sometimes to the point of exhaustion, had expanded her chakra stores considerably. Hinata had also taken into account that her spiritual chakra and her physical chakra must be pretty even too, since she had studied a lot and her physical routine was quite demanding. Her chakra levels now were above average for her age, but still pitiful in comparison to a normal genin or chunin. Even so, it seemed obtaining chakra was a long-term thing, plus, she hadn't grown fully yet either. Hinata promised herself a lack of chakra wouldn't be her downfall right now. There would be nothing worse if she found out the complex workings of a high-level jutsu, but didn't have the reserves to perform it. Hinata began by simply getting comfortable. Even though it was a wooden floor, there was always a way to get comfortable on something, especially Hinata was used to sitting on hard surfaces. Her mattress back at home was pretty firm. Closing her eyes, the small, secret prodigy started concentrating on her body. Each little breath she took was counted, every steady thud of her heart registered, every small sound outside heard, from the pitter-patter of feet to the sloppy sound of something being stirred. From the heavy, rich scent in the air she guessed it was some sort of meat dish. Her stomach growled lazily, but Hinata ignored it. Before she had started up her herbal business, she had been making their budget stretch very far. That was hard because Naruto had a monster appetite and Hinata herself had a high metabolism due to her exercise regime. But, with limited funds you could only do so much, and so Hinata had slipped her food onto Naruto's plate. From time to time when they had less money, which meant he got a full meal, Hinata didn't mind. The hunger, she'd been through worse than a few hunger pangs. When her body had stilled and her mind was blank, Hinata started focusing inside herself. This was the fun part to her. When she entered this state of meditation she could almost watch her chakra being pumped around her body from the glowing indigo core of her heart. By meditating in this way, she learned how her chakra naturally flowed through her body, which was helpful because it was harder learning chakra control when you were pushing against the natural flow of your chakra. Also, whilst she was in this focused state she could really feel people's auras a lot better. She could even count them. There were 2 people outside, one had a metallic yellow chakra and the other a greenish brown, and 6 people upstairs. She could also feel the intensity of such auras. The Hokage's light orange was quite powerful, but somehow Naruto's dazzling blue aura was a lot stronger. Hinata had guessed that she would become desensitized to familiar people's chakra, but it was the exact opposite. The more she studied a chakra, the more powerful it felt and the easier it was to track. It was useful when Naruto was skipping school, because she could take him back to the academy to learn. It wasn't just hard to get the blonde to eat the right things, but he bunked off school too. Sometimes Hinata didn't know whether she was a mother or a sister figure to him. Hinata was well aware that Naruto's education was suffering. When Iruka was not teaching, they had a different range of supply teachers. Mizuki was the worst. Sometimes he just handed them a textbook and told them nothing. Many supplies would send Naruto out of the class, explain what they were being taught and then let Naruto back in after to do an exercise or complete a sheet he had no clue about. Other teachers, if that's what you could call them, would explain the lesson in such a complicated way that only a few bright students would get the gist of what they were on about. And as much as it pained Hinata to think it, Naruto wasn't the sharpest person out there. He needed extra simple explanations, something only Iruka was willing to give. However, not all hope was lost. There were supplies that gave Naruto the education he deserved and Hinata was working on a way to teach him herself. All she needed was a technique that would make her a real clone, one that could pick up things in jutsu and generally not be an illusion. One that would be just like her, and would be able to teach Naruto the things he was missing out on. Excitement bubbled at the pit of her stomach. If she came up with the thought of a real, solid clone then of course someone else would have by now. Once again, the advantages of being surrounded by the best of the best struck her again. Unknown to Hinata, she was being observed very closely. Although, yes, Hinata could detect auras and start to feel emotions, she could never tell what they were doing. She couldn't feel the many eyes that scrutinized what she was doing. She's not an ordinary kid, is she? It's like an adult shinobi trapped inside a child's body. The silver-haired ninja shook his head sadly. Another child who had to grow up too fast. But even I don't know that much about her. All I know is that her parents are dead and she lives with Naruto, and a little about her powers. But for all my observant abilities, I can't figure out this girl at all. She's like one big mystery. Speaking of mysteries, I can't believe the plot twist in Ika. Kakashi, for that was the scarecrow masked man's name, went off into his own little perverted world. Why, any experienced shinobi could tell that that girl has done that before, and for a very long time. I've heard she is also a most valuable friend of my adorable student Lee. Oh, what a youthful girl. I must go and run in the forest to express my joy. Aura. Guy suddenly jumped out of his room, over the balcony to the ground floor of the wooden house. It didn't even take a moment for the fitness fanatic to regain his balance before he took off like a shot into the forest. Tiger, dinner is going to be ready in 5, the voice of the cat Anbu shouted, and Hinata heard all movement cease. But how else can I burn off this most youthful energy? Tiger's voice boomed back, startling some forest birds into an angry flight. An exasperated sigh escaped someone's lips. How about you go gather some water so we can all wash our hands? Scarecrow answered, and then sounds of a page being turned reached Hinata's ears. Not a second passed before Guy's roaring voice disturbed the forest once more. Scarecrow put that unyouthful book away. We are in the presence of a child not yet ready to bloom into an adult. Hinata let out her own minuscule sigh. It was extremely hard to concentrate on the inner working of hers and others' chakra if there was so much noise. Deeming the training impossible would be an overstatement, but she gave it up anyway and rose in a single motion. There was work to be done and Hinata was more than happy to oblige. She had felt guilty that she hadn't made herself useful yet anyway. Excuse me. I will go and get the water if you wish. Hinata offered, taking delicate steps towards the masked men outside. Since I haven't done anything useful. Hinata-san, you are on holiday. We are on a mission, albeit a very relaxed one. You don't need to do anything. The scarecrow masked man told her gently. Oh, okay. I'll get out of the way now then. The shy blue-annette bowed and started to make her way back into the hut, but a whoosh of air startled her. It brought back the painful memory of the gym, a whoosh of air, and a kunai. Instinctively, she ducked and sideways rolled, avoiding any harm that would come with the air. Breathing heavily in fright, Hinata looked to see what would have hit her. It was Lee's mentor Guy, hand flat out in the air like he was going to pat something. She's fast, and frightened. Hinata-chan, I apologize most deeply for alarming you. That was not my intention. I was coming to stop you going because dinner is ready. Tiger said calmly, talking to her as if she was a frightened animal. The serious side of Guy startled her, but Lee could be somber too sometimes. Guy is right though, dinner is ready. I am already back with the water. Scarecrow held up a full water carrier, much to Hinata's amazement. He proceeded to pour the water into a bowl before placing it on the floor and getting a stick half his body length. He drove that into the ground next to the water, got a pair of what looked like tights out of a backpack nearby and some soap. He speared the tights onto the stick and placed the bar of soap inside one of the hosiery's legs. He then proceeded to wash his hands with the tight-covered soap. You have to make luxuries like soap last. If you were to drop this slippery soap on the floor, you would waste some of it washing it to get it clean again. Scarecrow explained to a quizzical Hinata. The girl stored this valuable information inside her head immediately, before cleansing her hands with the crude soap on a rope too. Dinner was served quickly, and the group sat in perfect silence, even Guy, hungrily devouring the meaty stew they had been given. Dancing flames illuminated the masks of the ANBU creepily, and by the firelight the Hokage looked more old and worn than ever, but it didn't bother Hinata. All she wanted to do was get a full stomach and sleep soundly. She got her wish, bedtime was straight after dinner. The Hokage had gently rebuffed her offer for sentry duty, but praised her for trying to be helpful. A small hug and a pat on the head was what she got instead, and Hinata went to bed happy. The bland, wooden walls of her sleeping quarters, she could never call it her room was back home, made her feel closed in, isolated, but Hinata didn't let it bother her. Maybe the reason for her loneliness was the fact that she could always hear Naruto at night. His snoring reminded her that she was not alone. But out here, with only ANBU and a tired Hokage for company, things did feel slow and empty. Hinata could only hope it would change when she got to Suna. An entirely new town where the children wouldn't know her. A scary prospect, but an exciting one. The children in Suna wouldn't judge her for her lack of skills, her sleeping arrangements with Naruto, or the fact her parents never picked her up from school. Suna could be a whole new playground, but there again, it could be a lonesome nightmare and all the kids could hate her. Banishing the depressing thoughts of rejection, Hinata tried to sleep. All of a sudden, an elated smile stretched over Hinata's face. She wouldn't be alone at all. The mongoose were going to be here, that's if they didn't get caught. With that thought in mind, Hinata's mind allowed her to rest and she slipped into a peaceful slumber. XXX. Early morning sunlight beamed onto Hinata's face, waking her. The foggy mind of Hinata decided to try and sleep again, but a cooling forest breeze blew away the grogginess and her eyes snapped open. Throwing her arms back, the girl stretched long and hard, whining sleepily as she did so. From the glassless window, it looked to be a beautiful day ahead, sun shining, birds chirping, smell of bacon. Wait, bacon? With food on her mind, Hinata jumped up and got dressed. The Hokage had kindly placed her sealing scroll in her room, quickly. Her attire for today was a white short-sleeved shirt, a short, light gray cardigan. Hinata was used to covering up her body and that wasn't going to change, and a pair of navy, baggy three-quarter bottoms. Slipping on her shinobi sandals, the girl sealed her used hairbrush back into the scroll and strapped it securely across her back. By now her stomach was roaring to be filled, so she dashed out of her sleeping room and down the wooden stairs. Her nostrils quivered as the tantalizing smell of cooking meats got stronger, and her mouth watered in anticipation. She hadn't had a breakfast that someone else had made for her in years, going all the way back to when she lived at the Hyuga compound. "Good morning, Anbu-sama, Hokage-sama." Hinata greeted, unable to keep her eyes off the sizzling food over the fire. "A most glorious morning, is it not, Hinata-chan? If only my adorable student was here to do some morning training." Tiger greeted back, overpowering everyone else's chorus of good mornings with his, youthfully, loud voice. Hinata was about to reply, but the Hokage said something before she could respond to Guy. "Gigi, Hinata-chan, call me Gigi. Or don't bother with titles and call me what you wish." The old man chuckled. "Naruto-kun does." Wash of homesickness swept over the girl as she thought of Naruto's absence. He really was a big part in her life. He was always there, in the mornings, at school, mostly, and when she came home. His banter and general happy ways were sorely missed and Hinata didn't realize how much she had needed them until they were gone. Rumbling coming from her tummy snapped Hinata out of her melancholy thoughts. "Why yes, Hokage Gigi." "Hungry, Hinata-san?" "Bacon and rabbit on the menu today, along with some spaghetti loops." Scarecrow informed, gesturing to the pans of food he stood beside. Guilt festered in Hinata's mind. She had hunted rabbits, never eaten them. The thought of eating something you took the life of repulsed her. Eat or be eaten. Kill or be killed. Joe's words echoed through her mind so clearly, if it were not for her chakra sensing ability she would have looked round. But she still couldn't bear eating rabbit. It had been the first thing she had ever slaughtered and her first kill was always the most memorable. "Spaghetti and bacon please, no rabbit." Her decision was final, rabbit would be off her menu. Permanently. "All right." The man served up her breakfast, and in the face of hot, good food, her thoughts just switched off and she just enjoyed the primal feeling of satisfying a need. Once the meal was over, the Hokage rose from his seat. "We still have quite a way to go, Hinata-chan, Anbu. 2 days if I'm correct. We leave in 5. In a massive blurry of motion, the camp was spotless and the wooden house seemed to shrink and feed itself through the cat-masked Anbu's hands. Well, that was one mystery solved. "Hinata-chan, are you up to this? I can have one of my men carry you if you like." I'm sure Tiger would relish a challenge. That is, if you can put up with his shouting. I don't want to be an inconvenience. I will try my best to keep up." Smile stretched across the Hokage's face. "I'm glad that you want to try. You'll make a fine ninja one day. But, if it does prove too much, do not push yourself, just tell me. Do you promise?" Hinata crossed her toes, feeling only a little guilty. "I promise." A challenge of her endurance was needed. The forest never truly wore her out, and she had never ran for more than 3 hours before. It would be a good test to see how far she had come. The ANBU suddenly settled into the same traveling formation as yesterday, ANBU surrounding her with the Hokage leading the way. Same procedure as yesterday. Ready, men and child. Go! And so, the real trek began. XXX. Days later. The trees were thinning out quickly, Hinata noted, and the dark soil she was so accustomed to was becoming gritty and light. She knew this as her traveling party were running on ground now. Up ahead was the forest clearing, leading out into an expanse of blinding sand. Right now, the forest resembled more of a scrub and bush landscape than a lush forest. What really caught her interest was not the landscape itself, but the signs of life residing in it. One thing stood out in particular: there were smells not unlike her beloved mongoose everywhere, and occasionally Hinata's sharp eyes would catch the sight of minute paw prints imprinted in the grit. When Hinata's eyes caught a brown pair of eyes staring at her through a random shrub, she came to an abrupt halt. The rest of the ANBU stopped with her, and the Hokage turned to address her. "Hinata-chan?" The Hokage inquired, and Hinata had to think like lightning to make up a lie. Yes, she trusted the Hokage and his ANBU, but she had explicit instructions to keep her mongoose and meerkat summoning a complete and utter secret. Well, the desert. It's in the middle of the day and it would burn our feet if we walked on the hot sand. Hinata answered, hoping her lie would cover for her startled stop. Indeed, you are right. It's far too hot to travel across this desert. Not only that, but the wind is picking up and the last thing I want to do is get caught in a flash sandstorm. It's deadly to any ninja if they don't know what they are doing. The old leader rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Traveling at night would be the best option. The air is cool and the night clear. We rest for now. Well done everyone for going on this long. The ANBU knew that the praise was meant for Hinata and not themselves. They had gone on longer than this before. The child of the group really did deserve recognition for her efforts. Not once had she complained about the pace of travel, the length they were traveling for, or the shortness of breaks. Hinata herself drank deeply from the flask inside her waist pouch. She had put it on the first full day of travel when she had to stop the group to get a drink out of her scroll, replenishing any water she had lost by running. Plus, the temperature had been slowing but surely mounting as they approached wind country, and now she was at the edge of the mighty desert. It was truly stifling. She could only imagine how sweltering it would be to be out in the desert itself with the sun full on her back and the glare of the sand making her eyes ache in water. Once she had finished her water break, she stowed her flask away and flopped onto the mercifully cool floor. With a sigh, she concentrated on the auras around her, just to feel what was around. She was shocked by her findings. There were no less than 43 chakra signatures around her, not including herself, the travel group or insects. 43 other beings around her, all pretty small and primal. "Hokage-sama, shall we drive off the native meerkats?" A boar-masked ANBU asked, but the Hokage caught the mild anger on Hinata's face and ordered him to leave them be as they weren't causing any trouble. We are invading their home after all. Hinata relaxed, but just then, the auras came out of hiding into sight. In a single moment, Hinata was surrounded by no less than 43 meerkats, each the size of a 30 centimeters ruler. Most stood on their hind legs, classical human style, but some went on all fours, sniffing the ground around her most carefully. ANBU, put away your weapons. They will do us no harm. The Hokage's authoritative voice snapped Hinata out of her amazement, and she looked round to see the ANBU each in a fighting stance, kunai and shuriken ready. They are only here to investigate us. Movement in Hinata's peripheral vision caused her to focus back on the gang of furry investigators. The alpha pair, she could tell by the way they lead the rest of the group, Joe and Hen worked in the same way, approached her slowly, sometimes going onto their hind legs and checking the surroundings with sharp, dark eyes. When they were within arm's reach, Hinata cautiously stretched her hand out towards one. The creature froze and waited as the appendage came closer, inch by inch. Hinata's pointer finger made contact with the mammal's head, and found the fur to be rough but fluffy. Rubbing her finger in the smallest circles, she found its tiny ears to be as soft as silk, so she paid extra attention to them. It delighted the girl when the animal pushed against her finger, seemingly wanting more petting. A low purring rumbled from its throat, and Hinata softly mimicked the animal's sound, something she had learned to do with the mongoose. She could purr, squeak, bark, growl, and chirrup like they did. The secret summoner stopped her gentle caress when something furry brushed her other hand. It was the other alpha meerkat. It only brushed up once before going back to keep the rest of the group in check. The meerkat she had stopped stroking pushed at her hand before joining its partner at the front of the group. Then, all at once, the superfamily of mammals scattered, resuming what activates they were doing before Hinata showed up. Hinata let out a breath she hadn't known she'd been holding. Her heart was thrumming fast in excitement and she couldn't stop a smile forming on her face. That had been the first contact with the meerkats, and it had gone very well. Not only had the family approached her, the alphas had submitted to her touch easily and brushed up against her, essentially marking her as one of the pack. Well, Hinata-chan, it seems you have a gift with animals. That said, meerkats are extremely social creatures. They probably saw you as the smallest and least dangerous, so they investigated you first. You handled that well. Most children your age would have squealed. They are indeed very cute creatures. Hinata only gave the Hokage a soft smile. She wasn't gifted with all animals, just her summons. She couldn't wait to tell her mongoose family. The animals aside, Hinata-chan, I would like to offer you a opportunity while we are resting here. The Hokage told her, and Hinata inclined her head slightly in question. As we are doing nothing else until the sun goes down, how about a little training? I'm sure it would make up for the school you are missing. Hinata nearly shouted in excitement. A lesson of the most powerful man in the fire country was not something you passed up on. I would love to, Hokage Gigi. I like an eager student, Hinata-chan. I am aware of what you are studying currently. You are learning the transformation technique unless you haven't moved on from the clone technique. The Hokage drew out his pipe and lit it, inhaling deeply before continuing. These two techniques, along with the replacement technique, are the foundation of any ninja. It is vital to learn these to the highest degree you can before moving on to anything else. Hinata felt slightly shamed. She had moved on to other things as soon as she gained decent enough control of her clones. However, she was sure that her transformation technique was good. She had been using it for years after all. As for the replacement technique, well, she still hadn't mastered that, nor had she figured out where the logs came from. Before we start the lesson, I would like to assess your abilities so far. Not only in ninjutsu, but taijutsu too. I know the academy doesn't touch on genjutsu, apart from how to dispel. It's a shame. Altering the surroundings to your liking is an extremely useful skill. No matter when you are ready, Hinata-chan, please would you show me what you can do? Attack me in any way you want. Hinata was torn. Of course, there was no chance she would win, but she could potentially put up the tiniest amount of fight. However, that would require her to use her summoning knowledge, her Byakugan, her chakra tentacles and all of her fighting prowess. On the other hand, to get a good lesson and to find out what she needed to improve on, the Hokage needed an accurate placement of her abilities. She halved her gravity seal so it was now at 50 kilograms. Over the past 2 years she had doubled her seal weight. 2 years ago it was at 50, and it was at 100, a fifth of the seal's full power. She slipped off her shinobi sandals. She really did prefer bare feet, and got into her stance. That isn't something I've seen before. The academy doesn't have that style to my knowledge. So where did that stance come from? Curious and slightly apprehensive thoughts came into the Hokage's mind. Hinata took a step forward, fully using her stealth walk. In the past 2 years, the stealth walk was something she constantly used now, unless in school lessons. However, outside of school, in the playground where her and her group hung out, inside the house or walking around the streets of Konoha, the walk came naturally, and startling Naruto, who was admittedly pretty stealth himself, was always fun. However, on this trip out, she had walked like a perfectly ordinary girl, not wanting to arouse any suspicion. But, since she had already shown off her tentacles and a little of her speed and endurance, why not show off her walk too? She's walking differently. My ears couldn't detect the grass moving underneath her feet. She wouldn't be able to walk like that without proper instruction, and stealth walking isn't taught at the academy. That's a Chunin upper-level skill. Chunin have got to learn that to assassinate. Really wary now, the Hokage got into his own stance. Originally he was going to wait for Hinata to make the first move, but seeing her now, he was unsure. Slowly, still watching her every move, although she was perfectly still, a little unnerving, he stowed his pipe away into his pocket, after distinguishing it of course. This didn't go unnoticed by Hinata. She was watching the Hokage's every thought and movement. He showed surprise, apprehension and a little pride in his features all at once. Then, it all came back to her. Her chakra was unbalanced. It wouldn't even be a fair fight. Straightening up, Hinata raised her hand, asking permission to speak. She got it quickly, and the Hokage also lost his fighting pose to stand normally. "Yes, sir. I cannot fight tea today. My chakra and network is growing again. How foolish of me to forget. So we cannot do chakra work. Well, a taijutsu lesson is in order then. That style you're using. I haven't seen it before. Where did you learn it? Hinata froze in her thoughts, and then suddenly her brain whirred at 1,000 miles an hour. And nobody. I am making up my own style of fighting. The Hyuga style was too rigid. Your own style? It's an extremely difficult task. To make and perfect a style you need to have years of fighting experience, imagination, and a reason for that style. I'm very doubtful you alone have all three, Hinata. The Hokage raised a graying eyebrow. Unless you have been getting up to far more than I have seen. And no, I do not have years of fighting experience. Scar does, he's the main one who helps me. He has 300 years of experience. But I do have a reason, no other style works for me. I needed a style that could use what I had to its fullest. As for imagination, I only need to sit down and think hard about what would work. I see. I will not question further. Hinata relaxed a little. For now. Hinata bit her lip, she couldn't betray the mongoose. Not after what they had done for her. If she had to lie, then she would, willingly. If you would get into your stance, we will begin. Once again Hinata got into her stance, and watched the Hokage as he tried to copy her. She saw the strained look on his face, and frowned. The stance never hurt her. Why is this position so hard to maintain? She performs it with ease, but my old body is straining under pressure. I can feel it too, my center of gravity is the slightest bit off. If I correct it, that feels better. Still, my stomach and legs are crying out for relief. It seems the core muscles and leg muscles are vital for this to work. I wonder why though. The blue Annette waited patiently as her leader corrected his position. Still, even though he was copying her stance to perfection, he looked uncomfortable. Hinata knew exactly why. The core muscles and leg muscles had to be developed and kept in good condition for the user to be comfortable. Nerves attacked Hinata, she just wanted to get this over with. Not wasting any more time, she charged for the Hokage, who suddenly changed his stance into one he looked a lot more comfortable in. Alright, here she comes. She's fast, but I'm fast what? Hinata took another 10 kilograms off her seal, and her dash instantly became faster. She was before the Hokage in an instant, and had enough time to make the first move. She's going for my solar plexus. It was true, the girl had gone for the stomach of her temporary teacher. But Hinata caught the Hokage moving to defend, so suddenly, she used all of her speed and balance to swerve round to the Hokage's open side and land a hard jab in his ribs. A short groan escaped the Hokage's lips. He span round, but the girl had already moved. She was going for his other side, and once again, she changed at the last moment and decided to go for his arm instead. This time, the Hokage was ready to intercept both of her hits, but then she changed again, dashing round and jabbing the back of his thigh. How did she get there? Surely her dash isn't that fast? But Hinata's dash was that fast. She had taken off her seal completely, and was experiencing the full benefits of her training. The sparring went on like this, the Hokage trying to foretell where her hits would land, only then to have her change her mind and go for another, completely different place. Now, to a Kage, that tactic would be easy to defend against, if he were using jutsu. But, not wanting to seem unfair, the Hokage had limited himself, not even powering up his ordinary fighting moves with chakra. But his normal moves just weren't enough to keep up with her, his body was old and couldn't compete with the speed she was at. Nor could he bend and twist like she could. Whenever the Hokage got the girl into a position where she couldn't defend, which was often, her style wasn't anywhere near perfect, she would bend and flex in the most impossible ways, making him have to change his own course to land a hit. But by the time he had realized she had dodged and he had changed his attack, she had already regained her balance and was attacking herself, making him defend himself. It was by far one of the most unpredictable fighting styles he had ever seen, speed, flexibility and balance all combined together. and it all flowed really naturally. It was like fighting water. You think you've got it, for it to flow out of your grasp and attack you again. However, the Hokage wasn't using his full potential, whereas Hinata was doing everything to keep up with him. If the Hokage used his full taijutsu prowess, this spar would have been over long ago. But going all out against a child, even one who was skilled, wasn't the way to gain an insight on their abilities. Although he could point out quite a number of flaws in her style, if she were to fully master it. It made the Hokage shiver with excitement. Hinata herself was starting to feel exhausted. Her fighting had major flaws. 1. Because she was constantly in motion, whether it be to attack, feint or twist to defend, it took a huge amount of stamina to keep it up, especially at the speed she was at and the effort she was giving. Another flaw was that if one were able to predict her movement and match her speed, she would be doomed. This style relied wholly on unpredictability, catching the enemy where they least expect. She had little actual defensive moves, and almost no counterattacks. If she miscalculated a dodge and was hit, she wouldn't be able to hit back because of her precarious position. Time seemed to slow as the Hokage's fist came rushing towards her. She attempted to twist, but her muscles were screaming at her and her body felt as heavy as lead. The fist connected with the side of her head, gentler than she expected. Then a rush of power jolted through her temple and she fell to the floor, her body totally unable to move. There was a moment to breath, and Hinata took in the air deeply and gratefully. Her breathing was so heavy that the air felt like it was rubbing the back of her throat, making it sore, and her heart pounded so hard that blood roared inside her ears. The heat from the intensity of the spar combined with the heat of the desert made it unbearable, so Hinata did something rather ungraceful. She tipped a little water over her head. She knew water was valuable in the desert, but she felt like she would die if she didn't cool down. Well, Hinata-chan, it seems I underestimated you slightly. You must have been doing more training than I've ever seen. However, there are flaws in your style. And so, the rest of the day was spent getting advice from the Hokage and occasionally his ANBU, eating and watching the banter between the ANBU, mostly between Tiger and Scarecrow. The day flew by, even though Hinata was in one place. As much as she liked relaxing, her taijutsu lesson had only lasted 2 hours. She was excited when the sun went down. Not only would it get rid of the staggering heat, which had increased to impossible levels over the course of the day, it meant they would finally reach their destination, Suna. When her group had packed up, they set out across the sea of sand. Hinata gasped as she looked up at the velvety night sky. Stars twinkled in the billions like glittering diamond, not a cloud in sight to mar the view. The moon was at its half, but it cast enough light to transform the sand into a silvery grain. As the Hokage promised, the night air was cool, and as time went on, it fell to freezing levels. Even wrapped up in jackets, she had 3 on, plus her shirt, her body felt chilled, but she didn't let it detract from the breathtaking view of the night desert. The expanses of slivery, rippled sand and the clear night sky was truly a sight to behold. Her wonder increased further when a black dot appeared far on the horizon. They had nearly reached their destination. Frustrating hour passed, and the city barely looked closer. Another hour, and Hinata's spirits had returned. They were so close to the city. Even in the vague moonlight, she could make out the tiny silhouettes of the diligent night guards and the size and shape of the spectacular buildings. Hinata-chan, I give you this ID pass so you can enter the city. Unfortunately, Suna are, how you say, strict. They will not hesitate to throw you out of the city without identification. Expect to be treated with extreme caution, and please, don't lose your pass. The Hokage handed her a laminated card with her photo, name, age, and birthplace on. The card hung off a long, purple ribbon. Obviously it was meant to be worn around the neck. After some time, Hinata entered the city gates, full of wonder and excitement, pass round her neck. She didn't know that she was a walking time bomb, the demon of Suna being the trigger. Luckily for her, said demon wasn't currently in the guarded city that was Suna. But one day, he was sure to return. And that would be the day drama resumed in Hinata's life once more. It would be the day she changed, forever. Moonlight softly flooded the town of Suna, casting weird and wonderful shadows on the barely lit ground. Hinata stepped in wonder and awe through the dark streets, intimidated by the sheer height of the buildings. If it weren't for the ANBU and the Hokage, she would have been afraid. In retrospect, Hinata wouldn't have been in any real danger even if she were alone. The actual nightmare of the town was away, and the little prodigy was more than able to fend off any drunken citizens who roamed the place after the bars had shut down. Strange, dry feeling bothered Hinata's mouth and her eyes ached. She knew she was tired. It was strange really, she had been sitting down for most of the day and walking slowly for the night. It baffled her how doing so little could tire her so much. Stifling a barely concealed yawn, she wondered where she and her party were going to. All she was bothered about was getting to sleep, as quickly as possible. Preferably in a bed. She had been sleeping on a roll mat for a couple of days. She didn't mind of course, but it would be nice to have fresh, soft sheets again. Hinata's lack of energy did not go unseen by the Hokage. Guilt festered quickly in his mind. He had been treating her like one of his ANBUs since the spar. She had truly impressed him with her skills, and therefore failed to remember that she was still a child. It was something unforgivable. This was Hinata's holiday, not a mission. This isn't the time to put pressure on her. She won this break, so it needs to be a break. Kami-sama, she deserves it after what she's been through. Quickly, the Hokage scooped up Hinata and placed her on his shoulders, happy that she didn't flinch or resist. He didn't want her rolling away like she did with Guy. Quickening his pace, Sarutobi searched hard in the dim light for the inn that they were supposed to be staying in. He let out a sigh of relief when he spotted it. Meanwhile, Hinata clutched onto the Hokage's head, resisting the urge to squeal in delight. As tired as she was, it didn't stop her feeling things like excitement. She'd never been carried like this before, and she liked being this high up. A sigh came from her carrier, and she looked around. They were approaching a double-door building, hopefully some sort of hotel. It was unbelievably comfortable on the Hokage's shoulders, and his head made a really nice pillow. Waves of tiredness washed over her, and she gave in to them. Thinking of nothing, Hinata's eyes closed and then there was darkness. XXX. Hinata-chan. The girl under the covers groaned and turned over. Hinata-chan, wake up now. Another moan and the covers stirred. From underneath the sheets a blue-haired head emerged, not impressed that they had been woken. For once, she just wanted to sleep. It was warm and she had the luxury of fresh-smelling bedding again. Smells of lavender and chamomile filled her nose, and she inhaled it deeply. Then she noticed her throat was dry. Not just dry, it felt so raw she couldn't swallow. But then a bead of perspiration ran down her back, and a wave of unbearable heat hit her. Wiping the sweat off her forehead with an equally sweaty hand, she listened to what the ANBU was saying. Hinata, please drink this. It was Scarecrow who had been sent to wake her. The masked man offered her a glass of clear, hopefully cool, water, and she took it eagerly. As she gulped the thankfully cold liquid down hastily, Scarecrow spoke. Your body loses a lot of water in the night here due to the arid air, as you can probably feel by the sweat running down your body. Someone will wake you every morning with a glass of water, so you don't need to worry about a thing. Hinata nodded, still gulping the refreshing aqua, letting it wet the back of her throat. When you are dressed, please come downstairs. Someone will take you to breakfast. Okay. Thank you, Scarecrow-sama. Hinata thanked, setting the empty glass on the side. Her throat still felt strangely sore, even after all that liquid to moisten H. Scarecrow will do, Hinata-chan. I, like the Hokage, don't like stuffy titles. Casually, the man whipped an orange book out of his ANBU robes and walked out of the room, whistling to himself. Through the hotness of the room, Hinata wondered how he could wear such thick robes. Probably a jutsu. Everything all came back to her, the lottery, the travel, the desert. She was in Suna. Why am I wasting my time? A new town is out there waiting to be explored and I want to stay in bed. The blue Annette mentally shouted at herself, all the while unsealing some fresh clothes from her giant scroll. Sweat drops ran down her skin, making her feel uncomfortable, so she had a quick sponge bath with the little water she had left in her canteen. Then, she got dressed. Today's attire consisted of a plain, light purple kimono, with a dark purple sash around her small waist, white leggings, and dark purple shinobi sandals. She never knew when she might have to run. It was modest, but comfortable and guaranteed to keep her cool as the materials were light in both color and weight. Brushing her morning bed hair into order, she didn't need to wash as she had done so yesterday, and she knew water would be as precious as gold here. The sponge wash she just had was probably forbidden, but she had been so hot, she walked to the door, swapping her hairbrush for the ID tag on the small table. She slipped it round her neck before rushing out of her room and down the unfamiliar hall. Feeling adventurous, Hinata leapt down the stairs in one graceful movement, landing only a little shakily on the wooden lobby floor. Immediately she was swept up by a large figure with a notoriously bright aura. Since she already knew who it was, she didn't mind the fact that she was being carried. As Tiger rushed through the halls at a speed that was pretty much inhuman, Hinata just appreciated the cool breeze on her face. She was always one to try and look on the bright side of things. Not 5 seconds went by before Hinata was gently lowered to the ground, the Hokage right in front of her. "Good morning, Hinata-chan. I hope you slept well, what with the rising heat. I would like you to have some breakfast, and then go out into the playground while I talk with the Kazekage. Okay?" The old man instructed her. Hinata nodded, and went off to the buffet to get some food. The food was strange, not like Konoha's. Hinata got a small portion of everything, just to see what she did and didn't like. She didn't like the pickled vegetables, but on the other hand she liked the flatbread dipped in a bean, onion and tomato dip. Breakfast drinks were limited, it was either a really small glass of water or goat milk. Hinata, having never tried goat milk, opted for it. It was so different from cow's milk, she wasn't expecting it to be sweet and savory at the same time. She gagged at the first mouthful, not out of disgust but of surprise. The second mouthful, however, she was prepared and found the milk to be delicious, maybe even better than cow's milk. Making a mental note to buy goat milk in the future, she finished the last morsel of her morning meal. After placing her empty tray on a stack of other trays, she followed the Hokage's orders and found the way to the playground, just outside of the inn. Once outside, Hinata took a moment to appreciate the surroundings she would be seeing for an entire month. She had two main thoughts: it was noisy and hot. The sky was ridiculously blue and there wasn't a cloud in sight to mar it, nor to filter the harsh sunlight. The sun was a blinding, boiling orb in the clear sky, mercilessly raining sunlight down on the sprawling town and its citizens. Waves of heat reflected from the ground, the windows, even the people, and it hit Hinata like an oven furnace. She could feel herself starting to sweat profusely. The people themselves were tan, clad in light cloth from nearly head to toe, and pretty much everyone had their head covered. They were rushing around, doing ordinary, mundane tasks much like the Konoha folk did. Occasionally Hinata would spot ninja among the crowd by the way they held themselves. She could pick out ninja from citizens. Citizens would merely hurry around, often following the crowd. They were in a flock, generally rushing around to get errands done, whereas ninja would always be on the lookout. They had the sharpest eyes and ears and they observed everything around them to the closest degree. Not only would they look alert, but they walked in a way that reminded Hinata of a wary predator, waiting for chaos to strike at any moment. It did. Eventually, a child fell down amongst the crowd, but in an instant, a ninja passing by helped him up and placed him out of harm's way. Then, everything returned to normal. All in all, it was beautiful, but already Hinata missed the moisture, fresher air of her forest home, not to mention there wasn't a green plant in sight. Walking through the small, plantless front garden of the not-so-small inn, every sandstone-built building in this desert town seemed to tower above her. There again, she was only a tiny child. The little prodigy looked around for this playground the Hokage had spoken of. Screams of excitement came from her right, so she followed them and lo and behold, she found the playground. It wasn't much, a swing on a tree, which Hinata was immediately drawn to, and a large expanse of sun-baked dirt. But the children happily playing inside made it look like a real park. Hinata made her way over to a group of girls who were playing hopscotch. It had been one of her favorite games when she and Ino used to play together. The group of girls stopped and looked at her, but then their eyes glazed over in fear. They all took a step back in unison. I am not that ugly, am I? Hinata thought to herself sadly. That's when she caught two more auras entering the designated playground area. There was no fence. She frowned to herself as they both drew closer. One had a fiery, red aura with what seemed to be gray flashes in it. Hinata deduced that person was strong and competitive, but was in constant fear. The second person's aura was much more sinister, a dark shade of blue-green, but also with flashes of gray. Slightly sadistic, but like the red, in constant fear. Who are these people? Hinata spun round, and to her surprise, a tall, dark-haired boy with the blue-green chakra asterisk and purple face paint was right behind her. He was wearing a black, full-length bodysuit, with the hood up covering his brown hair. Two cat-like ears were on top of the hood, giving him the appearance of a black, painted, grumpy feline. Accidentally, she stumbled forward and pushed the boy back. High-pitched gasps rang around the playground. "Run, blue girl, run! Kankuro's demon brother will get you," one child shouted. The boy in front of her scowled, face made all the more menacing by the face paint. Hinata figured he was Kankuro. "Pfft, stupid kids. I don't even need that thing to help me deal with you." Kankuro took a large step forward, closing in the gap between him and a cautious Hinata. "Punk, you think you can push me around 'cause you're from Konoha?" Hinata opened her mouth to apologize, but she was cut off. "Shut it, scrawny. Don't you dare get cocky with me. Kankuro, she's only a little kid. And she's with the Hokage. If you attack her, Konoha might not take it well. Come on, don't you listen in the politics lessons we have?" A blonde girl with her hair in four spiky ponytails said. She was wearing a white kimono, a better choice for this type of heat. How the hooded boy coped in a black bodysuit was beyond her, with purple-edged sleeves, white knee-length leggings and some blue shinobi sandals. "No, I don't. The hag that teaches us is a right boring old fart. I wish our dear brother would take care of her so we don't have those stupid lessons." Kankuro replied harshly. The blonde girl gasped. Kankuro? You don't mean that. Plus, we aren't supposed to talk about him around the villagers, they are scared enough as it is. Why won't you say his name? It's Gaara. And as for the villagers, who cares? We might as well be like Gaara because no one will go near us. The boy glared at some nearby cowering kids with considerable venom. And don't give me that we should be nice to them crap either. We tried that and they thought we were gonna take them home for Gaara to slaughter. Who is this Gaara everyone's so afraid of? The whole village is scared of him, like they are of Naruto Nizan. And those girls called Kankuro-san's brother a demon, is he like Naruto? Hinata mused, keeping an eye and an ear alert to see what the two siblings were saying. Jinchuriki. Hinata whispered to herself, and the two siblings went quiet. What was that, kid? Kankuro growled, eyes shifting over to Hinata. Hinata was relieved that she had the chance to speak. Is your Nizan a Jinchuriki too? Hinata used Nizan, as she assumed he was older since Kankuro had used the word slaughter. Surely only an adult would kill enough people to make a village fear him? Not Nizan. He is younger than us. The blonde girl addressed Hinata properly for the first time. Anyway, you have a Jinchuriki brother too? Does he try to murder you in your sleep? Kankuro asked darkly. Kankuro. The blonde scolded, but her voice was blocked out. And no way, he's younger than them and he strikes fear into people's hearts, he's killed. He's not like Naruto at all. The village hates him, and the worst he does is prank them. They deserve it after all, but taking lives is another matter entirely. Konoha is lucky Naruto isn't like this Gaara. Hand waving in front of her face snapped the small bluenet out of her train of thought. Alright, 'cause you have a Jinchuriki brother, I'll assume because you're not dead that you can take care of his bloodlust. Either that or you're just a lucky punk. Kankuro shrugged casually. Anyway, this conversation is old. Don't get in my way again, brat, or I won't be as kind next time. He turned away and walked past his sister, not even casting a backwards glance to Hinata. Sorry about my brother, he's a little gruff. But I promise he's a softie on the inside. The blonde girl apologized. But then, like her brother, she strode off without looking at Hinata. Just when the two siblings disappeared from her sight, the Hokage approached the playground. Hinata happily skipped over to him. The atmosphere was tense since the two older kids left and she was eager to leave, at least until everything went back to normal. Ah, Hinata-chan. I see you've met the Kazekage children. There is a third, but he's away from the village on a mission. Hinata gritted her teeth. They were sending a child on a mission. It was like suicide, no. The Kazekage wouldn't try to kill his own child? Images of her angry dad flashed through her mind. A father could plot against you, Hinata knew all too well. Hinata-chan. Hinata snapped her head up to meet the Hokage's eyes. The wind and I have some more negotiations and details to discuss, so I would like you to go around town sightseeing for today. Please, follow me and I will take you to your escorts. Dread washed over Hinata as she followed the Hokage. She could detect two very familiar chakra signatures with one more powerful one, just around the corner of the inn. Don't say I have to go OR around with Kankuro, and his blonde sister stood beside someone who could only be described as the Kazekage. Clad in white and blue robes with his face covered up by bandages, the Kazekage was an imposing and mysterious figure. Kankuro's dark eyes narrowed dangerously as he caught the sight of Hinata standing behind the Hokage, whereas the blonde sister of the angry boy looked uneasy. The purple-painted boy turned to his father, mouth opened as if to protest, but a cold, disciplinary glare made him close his mouth. So this is the lucky child who got to visit our humble country. The Kazekage said slowly, brown eyes scrutinizing Hinata to a degree where she felt uncomfortable. Gee, good morning, Kazekage-sama. Hinata greeted, bowing low to the leader of the town. When she straightened from the bow, the Kazekage seemed a little less suspicious of her. It's probably my stutter that makes me seem weak. And the fact I can't meet his eyes. He is one to watch out for. Hinata thought to herself, suppressing a shudder as she felt his aura. It was a twisting, deep purple, paranoia and power radiated from him. He was a cautious man, but Hinata detected hints of nobility in his chakra too. It was really bizarre, to be able to feel nobility, but Hinata could somehow do it. Children, I am sure you will treat our guest with respect and kindness. Don't disappoint me. The Kazekage ordered in a voice that made his two children flinch. Hinata felt deeply sorry for them. Once upon a time she had a father who talked to her like that. Well, maybe a little more harshly, but still, she could empathize with what they were feeling to an extent. Be back at 3 for training. Until then, escort the Konoha visitor around our town. Dismissed. Hinata felt the air move as her Hokage crouched down and whispered into her ear. Her body tensed out of reflex, but she did nothing. I apologize for leaving you like this, but I am sure you will be able to handle the situation if it gets out of hand. I hope you have a lovely time, Hinata-chan. You may go. Hinata nodded respectfully to the Hokage and bowed to the Kazekage once more before following the two Kazekage siblings that had already gone off without her. When her escorts were out of sight of the two great Kages, they both whipped round to face Hinata. The blonde girl was about to say something, but was interrupted by her brother. All right, listen, brat. We'll show you around, but don't get in my way. Stay behind us at all times, unless you want to get trampled on. You got me? Even Kankuro's advice seemed like a threat, but since Hinata had had experience with her father and his brutally cruel speech towards her, Kankuro's words didn't affect her at all. This caused some unease in the Kazekage's eldest male child. She's a stuttering friggin' mess, but my talk doesn't make her flinch even a bit. This squirt is weird. Kankuro brushed it off and began to stride into the crowd. The blonde girl seemed to take pity on Hinata, so she grabbed her hand gently and pulled the blue one along. I'm Temari. That was all she got out of the girl whilst she was being pulled through the massive throng of people. Hinata was barged a couple of times, and she never got the chance to apologize, but she was used to it since the crowds in Konoha when the summer sales come around were pretty violent. She'd even seen a fight break out over an expensive set of kunai. Temari and Hinata broke off from the crowd eventually. Hinata took in the building before her. It was made of large, sandstone blocks, and a double-door entrance invited her inside. Stuck to some of the walls of the building were pictures and posters of puppets, and underneath were small texts of writing that were too far away to read, even for her. Hinata's ears caught the sound of applause coming from inside the building. "Ah, Kankuro, you can't be serious?" Temari sighed, looking at the building with boredom clear on her tanned features. Kankuro smirked slightly. "It's a massive part of Suna's culture, not to mention one of our primary military arsenals. Plus, they got a new show on today. It's called Pirates of the Suna Sea. I've got to see it," the boy said, excitement pouring off of him. However, his happy demeanor changed when he saw Hinata. "You don't have problem with this, do you, Squirt?" "And no. I want to see what this eye is. I would love to go inside." Hinata replied with genuine interest. "Wait, you don't know what this is? At all?" Kankuro asked, surprise written all over his face. Hinata shook her head in the negative. "It's only the greatest theater in all of Wind. The shows here are so realistic, because instead of human actors, their stars are puppets. You get all of the bloody action, with no one getting hurt." Kankuro suddenly quietened down, as if he remembered who he was talking to. Temari sighed beside her and went into the building after her brother. Hinata followed suit. A great deal of excitement swelled up inside Hinata. She had never been to a theater before. It would be a completely new experience for her, and she was looking forward to it. Sitting down after buying her ticket, the blue Annette bounced her legs in anticipation, much like the Kazakage's son next to her. The curtain rose, and the show begun. XXX. 2 hours later. "That was so cool." Hinata gushed to Temari, walking out of the theater. The plot of the show had been about if the Suna Desert wasn't a desert, it was a sea instead. It was realistic, funny, and the puppets were amazing. True, she could see the chakra strings that controlled them, but she learned to ignore it through the show. She had hooped, screamed, clapped, and stamped with the audience, and although Kankuro wasn't the nicest person she had ever met, once or twice he had sent a smirk over in her direction. It melted into a glare every time, but a small smirk was better than nothing, right? Temari had a small, genuine smile on her face. She had been very quiet for the duration of the show, clapping only in the right places. It was all right. It was amazing. Thank you, Kankuro. Hinata thanked, flashing a wide smile worthy of Lee himself at Kankuro. "All right, brat, calm down." Kankuro's words seemed gruff, but there was a minuscule smile on his painted face too. "Well, Kankuro, since I had to sit through that, it's my turn to choose." Temari looked at the sky. "It's about 11, so we are going to do an hour of shopping before lunch." "You can tell the time by the sun?" Hinata asked, wide-eyed. That would be a useful skill. She didn't have the money for a watch. "It's kinda an all-round skill in Suna, because if we had an outside clock the metal mechanics working it would expand in the midday sun and contract in the cool night air, making the time wrong." Temari explained. "See, could you teach me sometime?" Hinata looked to the floor. She didn't like asking for help. It wasn't because of her pride or anything, she was afraid of getting rejected. Luckily for her, Temari was nice. "It will only take a second, Kankuro." Hinata looked over to Kankuro, tapping his foot impatiently. "Anyway, the longer we take on this the less time we have to shop." Kankuro's dark eyes stretched further open in realization. "Take as long as you like," he muttered, sitting down in the shade. "Thought so. He hates shopping, he'd much rather go build something than buy it." The blonde shook her head, making her 4 ponytails glint brightly in the sun. "Alrighty then." Temari launched into a short explanation about how the sun rose from east to west, and the period for sunrise and sunset was about 12 hours. So if the sun rose at 6 a.m. in the morning, it would set about 6 p.m. at night. The period in between is easy to divide by 12, one section being 1 hour, so you can tell what the time roughly is by the position of the sun. When the short lesson was over, it was Temari who led the way through the town, Kankuro and Hinata following close behind. Kankuro didn't grab Hinata's hand like Temari had, but he stayed close, hopefully so she didn't get lost. Temari, if we're going where I think we're going, I'm going to actually kill myself. Kankuro groaned. Temari turned round and through the crowd Hinata could see a large, smug smirk on her face. It's a massive part of Suna's culture, not to mention one of our primary military arsenals. Kankuro muttered curses underneath his breath as they broke out of the crowd. In front of them was a small, dingy shop, displaying fans of all colors, designs, and sizes. It was labeled Fan in the Wind. Temari grinned at the shop and without any further ado, ran into it. Hinata followed, eager to feast her eyes on the beautiful range of ornaments. Delightful, almost familiar tinkle rang delicately through the air, reminding her painfully of home, more specifically, the Yamanaka flower shop. Before she could brood on the thought of home, she was warmly greeted by a wild-haired man. He walked up to her, odd, gray, windswept hair bouncing around on his tan head. He gave her a wide, wrinkled smile, and Hinata was relieved. It was the first full, nice smile she had gotten from anyone in this village. "Well, hello there, young lady. I haven't seen you around in these parts before. Budding young wind mistress, eh?" "And no sir, I am a visitor from Konoha." Hinata replied shyly, only just managing to look into the man's dark brown eyes. "Our friend Konoha, eh? Well, not to some people. No matter, eh? Come, what brings you to my humble shop?" The man had a raspy, yet strong voice, filled with age and wisdom. His aura was a pleasant, light blue, friendly and calm. It was a change from the fearful, darker auras of the Sand siblings. "She's just looking, Mr. Gecko." Hinata froze. Gecko, as in Tomoke Gecko? Thoughts of the kind, old lady who she had given the cold remedy to filled her head. Ms. Gecko had lived alone, and she had always requested that Hinata call her Tomoke. But, on her gravestone, she had had Gecko Tomoke carved into it. Tomoke had never mentioned any family at all. Was this man just a coincidence? "You Mr. Gecko?" Hinata whispered, catching the old man's attention. Do you know Tomoke Gecko?" Heavy, long silence fell over the room of the small shop. She lives?" Mr. Gecko whispered, dark eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Not a coincidence then." "No, she died a few winters back." Hinata made her voice as soft and soothing as possible. "She was my fiancé." A tear leaked down his face, and suddenly, his face seemed to screw up in grief. Excuse me." It's okay sir, she had a comfortable life." Hinata said, remembering how Tomoke's days were peaceful since she had created the herbal remedy. "And no, she would get ill in the winter. I remember." The old man sniffed. "Damn that snake. It's all his fault." Mr. Gecko's tan leather shoes scuffed loudly against the wooden floor of his shop as he shuffled behind his counter and whipped out a box of tissues. He blew his nose, sound echoing like a trumpet. "SN snake, sir?" Hinata questioned softly. Tomoke had died of a cold, not poison. Hinata would have been able to pick up poisoning straight away. The grieving man lowered the soggy tissue from his reddened nose. "Why yes." There was a long, hard silence as the owner of the fan shop composed himself. "About 16 years ago, Win traveled to Konoha for a Chunin exam. I came, and it was there in Konoha that I met Tomoke-chan." The man let out a watery chuckle. "She was a tough lass, age of 39 and single, like me. We fell in love quickly." A small, sad smile graced the man's features, before slipping into a mask of anger and despair. The night before the exam finals, the exiled Sannin of the Leaf came back to Konoha. He kidnapped Tomoke from our room. I had just proposed. She had said yes, just before that snake took her. Tears rolled down the leather-like cheek of the man. "Mr. G. Gecko, you don't have to tell us anything why you don't want to. Why you don't have to hurt yourself like this." Hinata fretted, looking at the broken shop owner before her. The kid is right, sir, don't do this to yourself. Kankuro added, dropping his tough guy attitude. You should go and grieve in peace, Mr. Gecko. Temari softly said, placing a small, brown hand on the man's shaking shoulder. No. No. Mr. Gecko replied loudly. Konoha el-Lass, you knew her, didn't you? Someone deserves to know why she died. A deep breath was taken in by the man, before he went on. He experimented on her, played with her insides. Tomoke, my dear Tomoke, returned to the village as a weapon. That snake had toyed with her body, and had planted a disease inside her. A disease that the Sannin Orochimaru wanted to spread amongst Konoha. This disease made her weak against one thing. The common cold. Hinata was starting to piece things together, bit by bit. Colds in summer were non-existent in Konoha, but wintertime brought the sniffles out on many people. Hinata had just assumed Tomoke suffered a little worse because of her age, even though she was only 55. But why? You haven't learnt about Orochimaru, they won't teach about him in your academy. He was, as simply put, a mad scientist with a vendetta against the leaf. He tried to wipe out your entire village by using my Tomoke as a vessel for his disease. If the disease spread across Konoha, every man, woman and child would be weak when the winter came round, since their bodies wouldn't be able to fight off the cold properly. Konoha would be easy for him to take. But it went wrong. The disease he created didn't spread from one person to another through contact. The only way the disease would spread was through family, genetics. If my dear Tomoke ever had had a baby, the child would have had her disease, if not worse. The old man flopped downwards, onto a chair that Hinata couldn't see. To stop the disease Tomoke had, she was not allowed to have any children. To make sure she didn't, they sent me back to Wind, so we couldn't raise a family, or even get married. I haven't been allowed out of this country since. Mr. Gecko held his face into his hands. And now, she's gone. I haven't been with anyone ss since. All because that snake wanted to destroy your town. The man howled in pure grief. IDD didn't even get to say goodbye. The CL closest thing I got to a farewell was when the Konoha medics dragged me away from HR. Mr. Gecko. I am so sorry. I can only say this, she really was comfortable when she passed. She went in her sleep. I found her, when I was giving her something, she had a long life, sir. I think the Konoha medics helped her, she didn't pass away until last year. I think Konoha came up with a sort of medicine to make her a little better. Hinata tried to console the man, but he just ended up crying harder. It was true, Hinata had found her closest client, peacefully resting in her bed, no signs of life. It had been a scarring experience, and she had told no one about it. People would wonder what she had been doing over there in the first place. Thank you little one, FF for helping my love. Hinata felt a hand clench hard on her shoulder. Brat, it's our cue to leave. Temari will take care of him. Temari nodded silently when Hinata looked at her and walked around the counter and disappeared into the back of the shop. Kankuro, somewhat roughly, pulled her out of the shop before she could see what Temari was up to, but Hinata respected that Mr. Gecko needed space. Hinata herself had wanted to get out of there, she had felt so angry. Orochimaru. You killed Tomoke-san. And tried to destroy my home. I vow on Mr. Gecko's tears of grief, I will get you one day. I will get you like you got Tomoke. Unusually dark thoughts spun through Hinata's mind and she wished she could see what the murderous traitor looked like, just to imagine what his face would look like when she killed him. Soon though, Hinata's thoughts changed into slightly less twisted ones. She had been sickened by the horrible ideas and even more sickened that she could think of them in the first place. She wasn't a bad person, so why was she thinking like one? That's when Hinata learned something. Grief does horrible things to people. It changes them. I can't let people grieve. I have to become strong, so that I can prevent the events that cause grief that will turn to revenge. But I am only one person. What can I do? I can't save everyone. Come on, Snot, it's lunchtime. But after a talk like that, I ain't got an appetite for food. Kankuro said with something like sadness on his face. It was hard for Hinata to tell with all the face paint. Hinata was nervous about being left alone with Kankuro. She wasn't really peckish herself, but she wanted to get on Kankuro's good side. It wouldn't help her at all if her only tour guide hated her. Well, we could go to the theater again. Her tour's face changed a little. The painted boy seemed to chew it over for a while, emotions playing across his face. When Kankuro's features set into a look of finality, he replied. Fine. I got money. Tem will be able to find us easily, she'll assume we went there anyway. You still got Dosh Squirt? Hinata nodded, and Kankuro immediately set off for the theater. Hinata was fully concentrating on the crowd's movement for two reasons: one, so she could nimbly avoid being barged, or barging anyone, but her being able to unbalance anyone accidentally was unlikely due to her small stature, and two, so her mind would wander a little from Mr. Gecko's grief. However, Hinata's mind wouldn't settle into musings of comfortable nothingness. The vow to kill Orochimaru burned through her attempts at calm thoughts completely, as strong as any physical brand. Watching the puppet show took her mind off things, she even had a little fun. The novelty of watching puppets move hadn't worn off, but Hinata concentrated on how the strings moved and which strings did what this time, being the observant, cautious child she was. She never knew when she might have to fight a puppet in the future, so if she could learn to predict the movements of the chakra strings, puppets wouldn't be a real problem. Well, that's her theory anyway. After the show was awkward, Kankuro had nothing to say to Hinata, and Hinata was too afraid of quite frankly pissing Kankuro off to make idle conversation. It didn't help her social skills with new people were very poor. She had barged him once and he looked ready to murder her. If that was Kankuro's temperament, Hinata shuddered, literally, despite the scorching heat, at what Gaara would be like. Hinata drew off the enigma of the third Kazekage sibling and focused on what time it was. If her novice ability of sun reading was correct, it was roughly around 2-ish. Kankuro informed her of this, before walking off without a sound. Hinata followed, ever the curious child she was, to see where her grumpy guide was off to. The pair ended up back at the inn. A wave of heat rushed over Hinata all of a sudden and she tentatively touched the top of her head. It was scorching to her fingertips, and now she focused on her body. She knew something wasn't right. Her head had been pounding all day, but she assumed it was just from the glare of the sun, but now she knew it was the symptoms of something much worse. She had also ignored her aching muscles throughout the course of the day as she had thought, wrongly, that it was merely fatigue from the journey here. And now she was paying the price for her ignorance. Dizziness started distorting her world and she stumbled forward. Pure muscle memory kept her from falling to the ground, but then another flood of wooziness came, and she fell to her knees. The heat from the ground hit her face like an open oven, and it took all of her strength not to faint. Hurry up, brat. Squirt? Oh crap. Kankuro's voice sounded so far away to Hinata, which she knew was not a good sign. She was going to lose consciousness soon. As her body was lifted by her panicked guide, the lids of her eyes began to close. Trusting that Kankuro would get her to safety soon, despite his indifference to her, she retreated from the heat into nothingness. The first thing that Hinata became aware of was a feeling of coolness. It was very pleasant, and she was tempted to drift right back off to sleep. All she could remember now was that it had been agonizingly hot, then there had been a little pain and then, nothing. Just when unconsciousness began to take hold once more, a voice startled her out of her relaxed state. Suna. Kankuro, heatstroke. The half-awake Blueannette caught snippets of conversation, and she snapped her eyes open. She immediately closed them again. The environment was a blinding white and her eyes had not adjusted to it. Most carefully, she squinted and little by little, her sensitive optical organs adjusted to the bright light. She was in a hospital room, which didn't surprise her. By the time the wooden door had opened, Hinata's sight was unclouded and sharp. Two Kages, accompanied by a sullen Kankuro, walked in. Ah, Hinata-chan? How are you feeling? You gave us quite the scare, you had a heat stroke. Kankuro-kun here saved you. Hinata bowed low to the painted boy even though she was sitting, but Kankuro's attention was fixated on the floor. But, in hindsight, it's my fault. I didn't teach you much about Suna before we came, nor how to protect yourself from the heat. For this I am dreadfully sorry. We will have to sort out that matter once you are discharged from the hospital. The Hokage apologized, while the Kazekage watched with narrowed eyes. Meanwhile, Kankuro continued looking to the floor as if it were the most engrossing thing he had ever seen. And no. I should have been smart enough, Hokage-sama, to know about the heat. I think with all the fun I was having with Kankuro-san, I forgot about it. Kankuro darted his eyes over to Hinata once before they neatly returned to the floor. Now that she was fully awake, Hinata noticed Kankuro's aura was dimmer than usual. Its usual sinister tone was all but gone and grey fear had replaced it. There was nothing for him to be afraid of. Humbled maybe, he was in the presence of two Kages, but terror should not be radiating from him. Well, he did have a strong father figure, but that should only make him respectful, not afraid. Hinata suppressed a sigh. There was too much fear in this town. Her thoughts were going to elaborate, but the Kazekage spoke. My doctors say you shall be out of the hospital soon. When you are discharged, someone capable will show you around and make sure you are safe. I think one of our ANBU will be observant enough to know when something is wrong. We don't want anyone getting the wrong idea if you are hospitalized again. Hinata noticed that Kankuro flinched when the Kazekage put emphasis on certain words. She was starting to piece together the cause for his sullen fright. The leader of the wind must have talked with him. Not only that, but the foreign leader's words caused some unease within herself. It was like the Kazekage was being too careful about harming her. Of course, if she were to be harmed, relations between Konoha and Suna will be a little strained, so she could understand why Kankuro's imposing father was going to such measures for her security. Not only that, the Hokage would keep a closer eye on the Kazekage to make sure he wasn't planning anything. Anxiety thrummed through her body. She shouldn't be thinking political thoughts like this. She was on holiday. I think Kankuro-san and Tamari-san were very good guides to me, sir. It was my own fault. Please don't be mad at them. Hinata quietly begged. She didn't mind taking the blame for anything. It wasn't like she was going to live with the Kazekage, unlike Kankuro and Tamari who would have to put up with the Kazekage's rage at home. She even bet that after this ordeal she wouldn't see him this close again, so it wouldn't matter if he were angry at her. There was a heavy silence as Hinata's words sank into everyone's heads. The quiet was just becoming borderline uncomfortable when a blonde doctor walked in. Of course, the Kages didn't even flinch, and Hinata was used to being aware of her surroundings, so she had heard him from a mile off, but Kankuro twitched slightly, and finally his eyes darted to his father a couple of times before wandering around the room. He really looked to be on edge around the man he called his father. Miss Hyuga. Hinata tried not to flinch as Kankuro suddenly focused his dark eyes off the bare-looking plant in the room to stare at her. While he does have politics training, he must have heard something about my former clan. My name does sound the same to theirs after all. I can see now that you are fine after your ordeal. I suggest you stay out of the sun at midday for the rest of your trip, drink plenty of water and wear light clothing. That is all I can give you, just try and bear the heat. I've already signed your discharge papers. I expected you to be up and about soon. You seem like a strong little girl. The blonde doctor smiled gently before bowing to the two powerful men in the room. He then left, his white coat swishing behind him like smoke as he turned round. Well, Hinata, since you have the all clear now, I bet you're craving to see the rest of the city. Hinata twitched in anticipation. She had only seen a small portion of what the town had to offer, but that portion had excited her greatly. However, night is dawning quickly. You slept for an entire day. Ultimate letdown. Hinata's small body seemed to deflate. Her stupidity had cost her a whole day of her short visit. Well, it was a month, but Hinata knew how quickly a month could fly by. This was a short visit to her. The year she had had since the incident with Akane had been one of the best in her life, and had all but flown by. She had friends, a stable source of income, her reputation amongst Konoha as an herb mistress was now legendary, even though they didn't know it was really Hinata. Hinata just hoped no one would put her absence along with the absence of the herb woman together and figure out her identity. She didn't want attention, a surrogate family of mongoose and of course, Naruto, not to mention that she was coming on well as a ninja. Yes, it had been a peaceful, fun and fulfilling year. It was also one of the quickest years of her short life. If this visit was going to be as fun as her past year, this vacation would be over in what would seem like a week. Unfortunately for her, the beginning of her holiday wasn't going to be fun at all, neither was the end. But Hinata didn't know that now. Currently, she was strolling down the long corridor of the hospital halls, Kage and Kankuro by her side. She had a slight stomp in her step and a small sulk on her face. Someone could have mistaken her for having a temper tantrum. She wasn't exactly, but she was grumpy that she had missed out a whole day of exploration. And being the girl she was, she blamed herself. Hinata concluded that her first full day in Suna had been somewhat of a disaster, but hey, there's always tomorrow. Too bad tomorrow would be just as bad. Worse even. Eventually, the cold Kazekage and his equally stony-faced son bid goodnight to the Hokage and Hinata. Not long after the pair of Konoha souls found their inn. Relief coursed through Hinata's body, she just wanted today to be over already. Keeping an open mind about the future of her trip, the oblivious Hinata snuggled down into the covers of her bed as whispers of chilled wind snuck in through the glassless window. Due to her little fainting session today, she had been asleep for a long time and her muscles were aching for release. She needed to exercise. How strange it was, to crave movement. Hinata hadn't known exercise had been such a part of her until she had stopped moving. Shivering as the covers fell off her small body, Hinata got out of the warm confines of her bed. As quickly as she was able, she got dressed into warmer, but still light clothes. Once she was done, she held her hands up in a position she hadn't done since she had come from Konoha. There was a minuscule wisp of smoke as an illusion of a young, brown-haired woman covered the blue-onette's true appearance. Inspecting herself to make sure that she had done the jutsu properly, she nodded to herself in the small, face mirror hung up across her room. Satisfied with her work, Hinata jumped onto the window ledge, not even needing a second to compose herself as she leapt out of in onto the nearest building's roof. Cool night air rushed through her hair as she ran across the flat roofs of the desert town. A wide, unrestrained smile graced Hinata's face and after 5 minutes of non-stop running she halted her movement and just took the time to think. Hinata's breath was taken away, not by exercise, but by the sight before her. Stars, along with the light from people's houses lit up the entire town and the moon shone its waxing light over the town also, so intricate shadows appeared everywhere. Over the rocky military wall the silvery desert stretched forever and beyond like a never-ending sea of quicksilver. But despite the beauty, Hinata was worried. Of course she didn't want to have anxiety on her mind, but a lifetime, excluding this year so far, of trouble and woe had given her a paranoid edge on her already nervous disposition. Hinata knew she analyzed things too much, read into things that didn't concern her, but she couldn't help it. If it plagued her mind, she would think about it. So far, the main things that bugged her were Mr. Gecko, the mystery of the third Sand sibling and the Kazekage's demeanor towards Kankuro and herself. She found herself looking at Fan in the wind, the lights were on and her eyes could just make out the silhouette of Mr. Gecko himself. Over the drunken shouts of citizens being thrown out of the local clubs and pubs, her ears caught a loud crashing come from the shop. Without thinking, Hinata dashed forward towards the shop, Mr. Gecko's safety fully on her mind. A small part of her mind remembered to discard her transformation illusion so Mr. Gecko would recognize her. Without warning, Hinata burst through the shop door, fully ready to fight. The sight of a suitcase was not a sight she expected. Nevertheless, Hinata's mind tried to figure out what was going on. Fans, of all sizes, colors and textures were scattered everywhere, some utterly destroyed, and others fully intact but merely out of place on the grubby floor. Judging by the bare money draw, the old, red cashier register had been emptied entirely, and the only paper Hinata could see was from the torn books also on the floor. A distant part of her mind raged, books were a mine of knowledge, she had snuck around to get her hands on the most basic of volumes, when here, on the floor, a wealth of information lay destroyed. But her vision was really focused on the wild-haired man stood amongst the destruction, hands holding an admittedly small wad of cash. Dark eyes impossibly wide, the withered form of Mr. Gecko stumbled forward as if to greet her. Quickly as her body would allow, Hinata saved him from falling flat in his face. He had caught his foot of a ripped fan. Mr. Gecko shot out of her steady grip, and Hinata let him go willingly. Immediately, the man shoved the money in the suitcase and struggled to zip it up. Mr. Gecko? Hinata breathed over the frustrated grunts of the rushed elderly man in front of her. What is going on? No time, they are coming for me. I've got to get out of here, quickly. Why won't you close? Mr. Gecko shouted at his suitcase, still trying in vain to shut it. Stepping forth lightly, Hinata went to help. Her eye then caught a pile of envelopes spread almost shockingly neat across the desk. Each one had a splash of red stamped on them, and the crimson words were enough to make Hinata feel fear. Final notice. Hinata had only once seen an envelope like this one. It was when she had paid the rent, but the rent collector had bumped up the price of her apartment because Naruto lives there. The next day she had received an envelope like this one, demanding money, or a list of threats written after the sum would be carried out. Of course the Hokage had sorted it out, but straight after the whole ordeal. Hinata had requested permission to set up a bank account in the Hokage's name. Hinata feared that if she used her own name, someone could interfere with her account. The Hokage had agreed, and now Hinata's bank had enough money in it to keep her and Naruto afloat if something were to happen. One letter demanding rent had shook Hinata into a state of panic. Mr. Gecko had at least 11 letters. And that was only by a rough estimate of her eye. Hinata could only imagine what Mr. Gecko was feeling, or just how much he was in debt. No wonder he looked ready to, He was running away. There are people after you, aren't there, Mr. Gecko? Hinata whispered, and somehow the panicked old man heard her and just stopped dead still. Yes. A straight one-word answer was all Hinata got before Mr. Gecko grabbed his finely zipped suitcase and sprinted to the door. Once again, the man stopped still. Revenge has a heavy price. Remember that, child. The words hung heavy in the air as the door slammed shut. Mr. Gecko had gone, and as the shop's door bell tinkled through the air, Hinata tried to piece it all together. People were after Mr. Gecko. He was on the run, and she was worried for him because the more in debt someone is, the more they are hounded. And judging by Mr. Gecko's flight, he had racked up a tremendous bill. Although Hinata wanted to run free through the town, the matter of Mr. Gecko was far more intriguing and frightening. Hinata wouldn't be able to concentrate on the beauty of the city with something like this weighing on her mind. Grabbing the numerous warning envelopes, Hinata took on her illusion once more and slipped out into the quietness of the night. Muscle memory kept Hinata from stumbling into her room, but not even muscle memory could keep her from collapsing on her bed. She wasn't tired, just drained. It had been a hard day, even though she had slept for most of it, and emotional fatigue was beginning to take its toll. She would have gone to sleep then and there, but someone was going to wake her in the morning with water, so she had to get changed as not to arouse suspicion. Groaning in resentment, Hinata dragged herself off the bed, which strangely felt more comfortable when she knew she had to get out of it, and quickly undressed and redressed in her nightwear. The envelopes on her bed also had to be hidden, so dragging up the mental energy, Hinata lifted the mattress up off her bed and placed the letters underneath. Hopefully no one would go snooping in her room, they had no reason to anyway. She was just a child after all. Distant part of her mind screamed at her to not be so stupid and turn the letters in, but two things stopped her. One was that Hinata was far too curious as to what was going on with Mr. Gecko, and no doubt that if she handed in the letters she would be kept out of the loop. The second reason was self-preservation. The Hokages would know she had been out after hours and that she could slip away at any time undetected. Security measures would be taken to keep an eye on her, and that would limit what she could do. So she would keep this little secret. Slipping into her temporary bed once more, another groan left her lips, this one of contentment. At ease knowing that she didn't have to get up until dawn, Hinata let herself drift off into peaceful darkness, hoping tomorrow would be a better day. XAliPiex. The massive crash of a door being thrown open blasted through Hinata's small room, waking her with a startling shock. Not a second did she have to compose herself before a green flash darted past her bed and rested beside her. Good morning, Gantha's most glorious day. Even though her alarm clock had a mask on, tiger to be exact, it did nothing to muff the exuberant voice behind it. I sincerely hope our ice overflowing today, little lady. As quickly as you will allow, let me serve this refreshing drink to replace the moisture you lost during yesterday's most challenging night. Over the ringing in her ears, Hinata's mind could still process what was being said. Well, bellowed. That is way too much excitement for morning time, or any time for that matter. Groggily, Hinata accepted the cool drink and drank gratefully, the dryness becoming present now that she had woken up a little. All right. Our esteemed Hokage would like you to be up and ready soon to meet your new escort. With that, I bid you a productive and most youthful day. Hinata coughed a dry giggle as Guy did the good guy pose, teeth pinging brightly in the morning sun streaming through her curtainless window. Then, in another flash of leaf green that reminded her strangely of home, he was gone. A small part of Hinata worried she was turning antisocial, for she was glad to be left alone in peace. As Hinata dressed in her heat-sensible clothes, her thoughts wandered back to last night. As much as she tried, Hinata just could keep her gaze off the bed where the letters were stashed. One look won't take too much time. The rookie detective lifted up the mattress again and with relief saw the letters to still be there. She picked out the most recent one and found the envelope to have already been opened, so neatly it looked like it hadn't even been touched. The other letters hadn't been opened, only this one, so Hinata drew to a conclusion that Mr. Gecko had only opened this one to see exactly how much trouble he was in. The Blueonette flinched. He must be in a whole lot of trouble to be running like that. Last chance. Mr. T. Gatto. Loan Services. Gatto Companies. Land of Hot Water, Kobe Port, Yuhi Street, Gatto Company. H6606T. January 13, 2005. Mr. Gecko. Loan number 236598. Original loan 25 million Rio, 250,000 pounds. Compound interest per year 29.2%. Years, and rising, since loan 25. Amount currently paid 40 million Rio, 400,000 pounds. Amount due 1508-829-6210 Rio, 150,782,962 pounds or 150,782,962 pounds. Mr. Gecko, it has come to my own personal attention that you have only paid 40 million Rio back since your loan in 1980, and have failed to repay the interest rate I charged. This is not acceptable. I gave you plenty of time to arrange the payments, but it seems now my generosity was wasted. I do not care if you are unable to pay me back, the debt will be paid whether it be in money, objects, or blood. More specifically, yours. If I do not receive my payment within 5 months, a face-to-face meeting will be in order. And I can assure you, it won't be pleasant. I will be forced to take action against you. You will lose everything, your home, possessions and life. If the debt is not paid, you will suffer greatly. That is a promise. This is the last letter my company and I will waste on you. Final chance. Look forward to receiving my money. If my demands aren't met, then I cannot wait to meet you in person. Yours sincerely, Mr. Gatto of Gatto Company. Blood swiftly drained from Hinata's face at the amount Mr. Gecko owed. She had never seen so many zeros. How exactly could one man use 25 million? And the amount of debt, she nearly fainted. The Mr. Gecko Hinata knew lived in a very humble shop, and well, his attire didn't exactly scream wealth. Hinata speculated, more than a little out of it, that owing that amount would do that to you. The threats, although no details were specified, also chilled Hinata to the core. She wasn't even the one on the true receiving end of this menacing letter, and already she wanted to run away from that letter, or burn it so its words couldn't frighten anyone ever again. All that she could comfort herself with was the fact that she knew who was going after Mr. Gecko. A man named Mr. Gato. She recognized that name. Hinata was aware that the Hokage couldn't provide for her forever, no matter how young her physical appearance may be. She had lost her childlike innocent view on the world a long time ago. She had grown up so quickly mind-wise, and knew that people did get into debt. The little incident with her own final warning bill had taught her that, and in her terror she had gone to the library seeking help. Enlightenment of what to do when the inevitable happened came in the book Shinobi Life, Getting Past Genin. Although she couldn't understand some of the more complex sentences, the book had shed light a little on the subject of adult life. For example, unless under extraordinary circumstances, like having a demon inside you, Hinata had guessed, neither a genin nor an academy student under 13 is not allowed to live in a household without a responsible adult to look after them. But the age of a responsible adult was different for civilians in Shinobi. A civilian's legal age, where they could buy drinks and be a carer etc., was 18, whereas a ninja's coming of age was only 15. Not only that, but if you were a chunin under 13 you were allowed to live alone because you were considered capable enough of taking care of yourself. But that was only little details. Hinata had found what she had really been looking for about halfway through the book, a chapter labeled Loans and Debt. She had started to grasp the concept of loaning, but what had really caught her attention was the subsection named Sarakins and Yamakins. Recalling the information now, Hinata remembered that Mr. Gato had been under the Sarakin section. And the simple definition of Sarakin was a loaner who you didn't want to mess with. They allowed one to take out a massive sum of money and then they demanded insane amounts of interest, that were just below the maximum legal limit, till the sum became unpayable. Then Hinata swallowed. The book had brushed on the subject of punishment, no gory details but enough to leave her scared. It was really lucky that the Hokage had been on her side and it had only been a small-scale bill, otherwise Hinata might have died worrying. So, to sum all it up, Mr. Gato really was trouble. And Mr. Gecko was in the trouble. Suddenly, footsteps approaching her room snapped Hinata out of her shocked daze and she moved with inhuman speed to put the envelopes back where they belonged. She had only just finished adjusting the bed covers when someone knocked on the door. Hinata's aura sense picked up that it was the Hokage, and she relaxed a little and tried to cool her face with her hand. She was human after all and blind panic did fluster her. "My Hinata-chan, you look like you have seen a ghost." The Hokage was right in a way, a ghost of the figures Mr. Gecko owed kept haunting her mind. "Yet, you seem so flushed. Pray tell, what is wrong, little one?" The brown, concerned face of the Leaf Leader gazed at her, expectant for an answer. Hinata struggled to find an answer. Don't feel too well." In her uncertainty, Hinata stuttered more than usual. Luckily, her stomach growled and gave her a real excuse as to why she looked like a deer in the headlights. I can't remember the last time I ate, Hokage Gigi. I feel dizzy." "Well, I will remedy that in no time. I do hope you are adjusting to the Suna cuisine. It took me a while to get used to it, especially the milk." The Hokage said as Hinata followed him out of her room and down the stairs. A combination of the Hokage's presence and no longer being under the Hokage's scrutiny relaxed Hinata, but not enough to forget about those dreaded letters hidden underneath her bed. "I know goat's milk is supposed to be more nutritional than cow's, but I just can't seem to get my taste buds to accept goat. Or my mind for that matter." The Hokage chuckled and Hinata joined in even though she had only just tuned into the Hokage's chatter. I prefer goat's milk, it's sweeter to me." Hinata replied quietly, happy that she didn't miss anything important whilst she was thinking. At the dinner hall, the ANBU bowed their heads to the Hokage and nodded in Hinata's general direction. As she was getting her breakfast, flatbread, salad and something called falafel. It looked rather nice and smelt even better, and she hadn't seen it on offer the day before. She asked the Hokage, who had accompanied her to the buffet, why the ANBU was still in uniform and masks. She was merely curious, it was a holiday after all. "Well, Hinata-chan, I am unarmed and it's safety protocol for any Kage to have weapons on them unless accompanied by armed ANBU members. It's a gesture of goodwill that the Kazekage let me and my ANBU come and stay here, and you of course. And it's a goodwill gesture on my part to keep my ANBU in line and come unarmed to any meetings we have. It's just a trust matter. Nothing to get worried about. They seem to be having a good time, even though you can't see their faces. Her Hokage answered, casually helping himself to some flatbread. Hinata nodded noncommittally and finished selecting her breakfast. The Hokage strolled to the ANBU's table, plate full of food, and Hinata followed suit. Breakfast was a quiet but comfortable affair. The inn Hinata and her party were staying at was expensive enough to be comfortable, but humble enough to not be famous and attract too many customers. Her experience was only slightly marred by the fact that Guy was sitting next to her and she was quite afraid of another outburst of youth. It was not something she needed when she was eating her falafel at roughly 8 in the morning. She was used to Lee's exuberance, but Guy was on a level far beyond Lee. Hinata, with some fear, realized that Lee was one day going to be exactly like Guy, so she might as well get desensitized to Guy now. Fortunately, the usual exuberant man was quiet, devouring his morning meal with a hearty gusto. Breakfast in general was a quiet and relaxed affair, much like yesterday. That was, until the leader of the desert entered the dining hall. All mindless chatter stopped amongst the patrons of the hall, and all eyes were turned respectfully to the Kazekage. Luckily, he didn't seem angry. There was just a proud haughtiness to him that seemed to suck the warmth out of the air. The Hokage was the first to move, the scraping of his chair breaking the heavy silence. Hinata, as she was sitting next to the Hokage, could see her lead ruler give the sand a small smile in greeting which wasn't returned. Hinata wasn't surprised that the Kazekage didn't smile back. He didn't seem like that type of person. I didn't expect you to meet us until noon, old friend. What brings you to us so early this morning? Sarutobi asked cautiously, whilst Hinata tried to read the emotions of the foreign Kage. Her conclusion was mild annoyance and traces of unease. But what could possibly make a Kage uneasy? Hinata could only think of one thing, but it was so small scale that no one really should have noticed. Unless Suna's population was smaller than she thought. There was a disturbance in the night. One of my civilians has gone missing. Hinata took a sharp intake of breath and held it while the Kazekage's dark eyes swept over her form. They held her gaze for a moment before the sand ruler moved his penetrating gaze away. We've been investigating the scene and found some rather interesting things. I see. And so your meeting this morning is going to be held off, hence why you came to me. Hiruzen finished slowly, saying the words like they were a statement and not a question. Indeed. We have much to discuss. Our lucky visitor has an escort outside waiting for her. The Kazekage turned to Hinata, no emotion in his eyes. You will have a chance to see the desert today, no harm will come to you this time, your escort is sure to take care of you. Before Hinata could give her thanks, the Hokage spoke. I hate to rush you into this so soon, but the Kazekage and I have to get working soon. Boring grown-up stuff. Have a lovely day in the desert, Hinata-chan, I'm sure you will learn lots. Who knows, you might see the mongoose again. The elderly man smiled down at her, every wrinkle in his brown skin made clear by the movement. Hinata tentatively smiled back, knowing that it was the Hokage's way, albeit kind, of saying you need to go. With a low bow to the Kages and the Leafs ANBU, Hinata left the hall. For some reason, she felt all eyes on her, but quickly discarded that to the back of her mind. She didn't really feel pressure that she had been in until she had left the room though. Letting out a breath of relief, the prodigy child wandered down the halls, letting her memory guide her to the entrance. A figure appeared out of nowhere when she was a few meters away from the entrance, making Hinata tense up in fear. Still tense, Hinata assessed the man before her. He was a very tall man, with a muscular build and dark, tan skin, not without its scars. He had two distinctive, red markings on the right side of his face, the only visible part of his head, with the rest being covered by a white, turban-like headgear and by a sheet hanging from it on the left side of his face. His eyes held no particular warmth, but Hinata could detect any dislike in them either. His mouth was thin, and set into a small, tight smile. Hinata let a frown ghost her face for a moment. She would rather spend time with a man true to himself than one who was forcing himself to smile at her. His attire was of little consequence, a standard ANBU flak jacket and a sand forehead protector tied tightly round his head, holding his turban in place. Taking a small step forward, the stranger began to speak. "Allow me introduce myself. I am Baki, and I shall be your guide today." He had a pleasant, gravely voice, and spoke his words very clearly. "On the agenda for today is a trip across the desert to the water facility we have there. It's a routine checkup, and a way for you to get out of the city for a while." Hinata controlled her expression, but inside the first tendrils of anxiety were starting to wrap around her mind. Why did she need to be out of the city for a while? Yes, investigations were going on as to Mr. Gecko's disappearance, but that would be confided to one area, wouldn't it? Before that, a master class in Earth survival is in order. I heard about your accident yesterday, and it is up to me to prevent that from ever happening again. Baki gestured for her to follow, before turning and walking out of the door, only stopping to hold it open for her. Baki walked swiftly, wasting no time, and Hinata's small legs were struggling to keep up with him at walking pace, so she started jogging beside him. Baki's eyes slid over to her, and narrowed. He stopped, all of a sudden, and Hinata's lightning reflexes stopped her from crashing into anything. Lesson 1. Hinata flinched. Hi, she used to say that to her just before her thoughts trailed off and she shuddered, still keeping her ears open for as to what Baki had to say. In Suna, physical exertion has to be kept at a minimum, unless you absolutely need to run. As people in Suna grew up with the heat, they have adapted so they can walk at normal speeds and not feel the heat. You, on the other hand, coming from a cooler part of the world, aren't used to the temperature, and therefore will lose more sweat and gain heat quicker, resulting in another heat stroke or severe dehydration. Baki frowned for a second, face locked in thought. The obvious solution is to lessen the intensity of which you are working at, but we are in quite a hurry today. The group are setting off in just a few hours, around 5 in the afternoon, and you need to be taught the proper survival techniques. Baki scratched his smooth, tan chin with an equally tan hand. Hinata took note of the small scars littering his hands. He was a shinobi, through and through. Suddenly, without warning, Baki swooped up and placed Hinata on his shoulders. If you don't have to work at all, then the chance of you becoming ill is lessened. Once again Baki set off, Hinata clutching his head tightly. Atop his head, Hinata had little to do except for admire the sights around her and inspect Baki's personality through his aura. He wasn't on her mental register of auras yet. Closing her eyes, she rested her head on his and instinctively felt around with her mind. His aura was a murky blue, flowing in calm waves around his body, occasionally changing directing spontaneously. The man had quite some power at his fingertips, but there was a sense of experience and reserve that Hinata knew would keep the man from going wild with it. She trusted this man a little more, but she didn't really know him, so she vowed to keep her guard up. He might be allied with the leaf, but friendships can turn rather easily. She would never forget her experience with Ino. Hinata familiarized herself with Baki's chakra signature until she felt him come to a sudden stop. Opening her eyes, she took in the sight of the building before her. It was a huge, towering dome of sandstone, with a brightly colored sign of the front face saying Suna Academy. Hinata shifted a little in excitement. She was coming to learn. And hopefully, no one would be mean to her in here. They didn't know her after all. Neither did anyone back in Konoha really, and they were nasty too. Hinata flopped a little, but was forced to come to her senses when she was suddenly removed from her perch on Baki's head. I trust you can walk now, it will be shady and cool inside. Come. Baki barely finished his sentence before he turned on his heel and disappeared inside, Hinata obeying his command obediently. The room through the great entrance of the school was a gigantic hall which was occupied by around 15 students who were waiting patiently in 3 even rows. Hinata spotted Temari and Kankuro in the first row, and a surge of happiness and then guilt ran through her. She had got them into trouble. They won't want to talk to me again. Baki led her gently up the front, and introduced her to the entire class. No one said a word to her, and when a blushing Hinata looked to Temari and Kankuro to gauge their reactions to her presence, she found nothing. They were apathetic to her. Unfortunately, Baki directed her to stand next to Temari and quietly instructed Temari to help her with anything she happened to struggle on. Hinata caught a flicker of confusion go across the spiky-haired girl's face before an empty look replaced it. Temari nodded silently and then Baki went back up to the front again. The lessons of desert survival had begun. XXX. Hours later. 4:30 p.m. I hope you use what I taught you today wisely. Homework will be a 2-page essay on the correct equipment to use from the sheet I will give you and why you have chosen them, and not the others. Baki's gravelly voice instructed the class, handing round a crisp, paper sheet. Hinata, Kankuro and Temari did not receive a sheet, and Hinata wondered why. Then she remembered, she was leaving for the desert soon. Still, why aren't the Kazekage Sea children getting one? Baki finished handing out the sheets before dismissing everyone. When Hinata and the two San siblings tried to move to leave, however, Baki held up a large, tan hand to stop them. The trio did, and waited for Baki to explain. The Kazekage has already told Hinata that she will be joining the trip across the desert today, but I doubt anyone told you too? The two San siblings shook their head confirmation. Well, no matter, the Kazekage has been very busy today with an investigation. So the rumors are true then? Gecko has gone missing? Temari asked, blue eyes wide with fear. Unfortunately, yes. However, I do not have permission to divulge any more information regarding the case. Baki said gravely, dark eyes softening a little when Temari held a hand to her mouth in a strangled sort of gasp and turned away. Pure guilt engulfed Hinata as she looked at Temari's broken expression. Wrinkles of grief made themselves clear as her blue eyes shut tightly, almost as she were physically holding back tears. A deep, heavy feeling weighed in Hinata's stomach and her mind worded what to do. She was out of her depth. How stupid of her to think she could investigate Mr. Gecko. Of course others would try and find out what was going on. Decision was made. When she got back from the desert she would leave the bills somewhere safe, as well as give an anonymous statement as to what had happened in the shop last night. It was the least she could do, and also the most. Fear stopped her coming forward now, the fear of disappointment in the Hokage's eyes at finding out she was a sneaking little liar, and fear of never being welcomed into Suna again. Fear of non-acceptance. The silence that had weighed down all of them was broken as Baki spoke again. Temari-chan, I am sorry for your loss. But we need to be focused. You are all going on this trip, and I expect you to be as clear-headed as any ANBU we have. I will accept nothing less, from any of you. An unknown emotion filled Hinata and she touched her chest tentatively. No one had ever really expected anything of her before, no one had ever believed she could do anything. It was such a strange feeling. Did Baki truly believe that she could do it? Sir, is the fact that Gecko-san is missing the only reason we are going to be out of town for a while? Kankuro asked, narrowing his painted eyes in suspicion. Baki sighed. The third sibling is returning early from his mission. He might be especially unpredictable, and so we deemed it right to get you two as well as our guest out of town for a while. The two children beside Hinata paled and their auras abruptly changed to radiate gray terror. Just the mention of him gets everyone scared. We better be getting off then, unless you three have any more questions? Silence was Baki's only reply. Your bags have already been packed, we sent some chunnin into your rooms to gather your supplies so we don't have to wait. Hinata only just kept herself from fainting. Nodding, Hinata bit the inside of her cheek and dug her nails into her hands to keep her from acting in fear. What if they found something? Come along you three. Baki turned on his heel and left with a grace and speed that Hinata was already getting used to. She was careful to keep behind the two San siblings. She didn't like leaving her back exposed to people who could possibly be hostile. The sun was now a low, simmering orb in the sky, still giving out intense heat to an extent where it was pleasant. There wasn't cloud in sight as usual, but soon as dusk sky didn't need clouds to give it character. The sky was streaked in shades of magenta and yellow, like the brushes of a hurried artist had painted them, and the stars were only just beginning to make an appearance from the blackening heavens. The trek would be easy on the senses, however the company might send Hinata over the edge. Kankuro hadn't said a word to her all day and Temari had been perfectly polite to her, but it was a cold politeness that warded Hinata off from going further in their conversations. As for Baki, well, he didn't seem like the type to speak with actions rather than with words. The realization that there's no place like home crashed into Hinata, and she longed for the furry faces of her surrogate family and her friends back in Konoha now more than ever. Awaiting the quartet at Tsuna's heavily guarded entrance was a single man with numerous bags arranged carefully into a line before him. He was, like most ninja Hinata had seen, perfectly composed and dressed. He wore the traditional shinobi flak jacket, light gray pants and bandages were wrapped around his arms from his wrists to his elbows. His sandhitayate was securely wrapped around his forehead, which held in place a white turban which Hinata assumed would keep his head cool. Then man had no defining facial hair or features apart from a little stubble, and his face was not one you would remember in a crowd. "Hinata-chan, this is Kyoto Yudashir, one of Tsuna's best jonin. He will be accompanying us for the desert trek tonight," Baki said. Hinata bowed deeply to the man in respect, but couldn't find the courage to introduce herself back. Luckily, the man just smiled politely at her before averting his blue eyes elsewhere. "All right, you lot, get your supplies ready. We are leaving in 5 minutes, no excuses," Baki commanded, and so Hinata, Temari and Kankuro proceeded to check their equipment carefully. Anything broken or missing might be the thing they needed most. Hinata learnt that today. Even matchsticks might be the difference between life and death. Minutes later, as promised, Baki ordered them all to move out. Hinata noticed that the Sand siblings were sticking close together, and that they were sending out faint signals for her to keep away. Hinata sighed and followed Baki out through the main gates, hoping that this trek would result in the Sand duo bonding with her a little more. Bonding, however, was going to be the least of her worries.
That's it for today. Remember to show your support to the creator of this story if you enjoyed it. If you would like more parts of the story to be uploaded, leave a comment and subscribe to get notified when the story continues. Bye-bye for now, and I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your day.